He sliced off the fossa cub's neck. It all happened in a blink of an eye. Myung was unwavering. His movements were natural, as if doing this was obvious. The relationship between Myung and the Fosse was already past the point of reconciliation. He couldn't leave any seedlings if he wanted this war to end. Myung placed the head and body into a sack. The woman blankly looked at the scene like an outsider. "Brr. He's crazy." She shuddered. The Fosse moved in packs while everyone took care of the young. It was like they were all parents. What was more, if a cub was within tens of kilometers, they would be able to find it. As the thick scent of blood had spread, the pack of Fosse should be on their way to the crater. He acted this way even though he knew the consequences. Actions without a hint of hesitation. Did he have multiple lives? As if he didn't care, Myung summoned the Sorceress of Lightning. Sorceress of Lightning, protect the sack and the woman. Not. The Sorceress of Lightning, who had the appearance of a girl, nodded. She had incredible defending abilities. It wouldn't be easy for anyone to pass through an oncoming lightning storm. She could definitely buy enough time. How can a goblin use an undead? The woman who silently looked at the scene asked. Goblins were races who used natural forces. They specialized in controlling fires and water. On the other hand, the undead were monsters that went against the natural forces. The living dead. It was definitely quite a distance away from the powers a goblin could handle. However, the goblin in front of her. I don't understand. The woman inwardly shook her head. Although they were on the same boat, she had never heard of a goblin like him existing. Even if she would occasionally hear rumors about an exceptional goblin king, it was unimaginable for a goblin to control the undead. Keep holding the marble, so that all who come can see it. Myung didn't reply to the woman's question. He didn't care about what others thought of him. The woman's eyebrows twitched when she heard those words. Are you telling me to die? To keep hold of the marble of territory? It would definitely provoke Heidegger. He would definitely kill her first. As expected, Myung didn't reply. Instead, he turned his back. They are coming. They were Heidegger and his companions. The woman scratched her neck. Due to her intense nervousness, she wasn't even able to gulp down her saliva. Her thoughts were complicated. There wasn't a single thing that was normal. It was simply a mess. However, she understood one thing. He's out of his mind. The goblin in front of her had to be crazy. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be taking such risks. Most monsters would try to avoid a Fosse pack. And Heidegger was a veteran who had already lived in the underworld for more than 5 years. Although the people he kidnapped weren't particularly strong, his ability to cross over to a demon god's territory without anyone's knowledge was frightening. No matter how strong the goblin was, it didn't seem like he would be able to handle them both. I'll probably die the moment I try to escape. But the goblin was heartless. It seemed like he had no emotions. He didn't seem like a goblin who would just watch her escape. Like how he killed the fossa cup, he would kill her without blinking an eye. The woman gathered her courage and asked another question. Goblin. Sir, it's strange to keep calling you that, so please tell me your name. My name is Atisha. A human and a goblin exchanging names. It would be a funny scene, but the woman was desperate. If she could relieve a bit of the tension, she wanted to know even the insignificant details of the goblin. To not know anything and to wait was too frightening. At the same time, the woman was finally able to hear a reply. You don't need to know. Heidegger's hair blew in the wind. The Death Warrior's sword barely touched the lines of his throat. Phew. It was close. However, no matter how strong he was a Death Warrior. He couldn't be considered very strong. Heidegger was able to handle it himself. His defense is incredible. The problem was his armor. There wasn't even a dent even after he stabbed and slashed at him. It didn't seem like he would be able to smash the armor with normal weapons. He wasn't created by a lich. There is no way a lich would put this much effort to make a Death Warrior. He kept his distance as he examined the warrior. The rank of his equipment could widen anyone's eyes. Someone gave that level of equipment to a Death Warrior? Liches were the lords of the undead. Although there were different levels of liches, they were existences who could create countless numbers of Death Warriors. On the other hand, creating a top-ranked undead like a Death Knight was complicated. It was to the point where it was rare for liches to have more than one death knight. Anyways, it was normal to give that level of skills and equipment to at least a high-ranked undead. Unless they were rich. 1. Quite funny. He smiled slightly before wielding his twin swords. Blaze. Light shot out of the Death Warrior's back. And for some reason he started to back away. Are you running away? He lightly clicked his tongue. However, his eyes were filled with interest as he looked at the Death Warrior. As long as a lich wasn't supporting him, it wouldn't matter if he smashed him into bits. With all his strength. The moment he decided that, Heidegger stabbed his heart with his twin swords. Pant. Creak. Heidegger dropped his head. And soon after, red tentacles started to crawl out of the wound. To be exact, the things popped out of his heart and wrapped Heidegger's entire body. Hundreds, thousands of tentacles formed to create a strong armor. Heidegger lifted his head. Run away. Why did he transform without telling us? Pang dash. He smashed the head of the man who spoke. His head exploded like a watermelon and blood splattered everywhere. However, Heidegger, who had killed one of his companions, acted like nothing happened and just frowned. I always think the same thing when I transform, but it really feels disgusting. Prek. He warmed up. Then he said to his terrified companions, "You guys go get the marble of territory from that woman. Leave the undead to me." Yes. More than 10 men left as if they were running away. Heidegger turned his attention towards the Death Warrior at a distance. With a disgusting smile plastered on his face. Slam. It took a moment for Heidegger to approach the Death Warrior and slam him with his fist. The Death Warrior flew up high before being nailed to the ground. However, the Death Warrior stood up again like a roly-poly toy. Do you think that armor will be able to block the current me? His smile became even more disgusting. In the underworld there were no laws. A place for the strong. The world where the strong would survive while the weak would die out. And in this world Heidegger was known as an outlaw. That just showed how evil the person named Heidegger was. Kidnapping more than 100 people was nothing. Companions? The word companion was comical. They were nothing but expendable items needed only to watch over the slaves. Slam. Smash. A one-sided beating began. All the Death Warrior could do was to block. Blackie, look at me now. Am I not beautiful? Self-obsession. Heidegger had something like that. He was very happy with his current self who had taken off the clothes of a human. A feeling as if he didn't conform to the standards and rules of humanity. A mixture of liberation and excitement which was impossible to explain. Hideous. But at that moment, somewhere behind him, an unknown man appeared denouncing his current self. A mystery man wearing a red helmet and cape. Who are you? Did you start following my style? Heidegger's body was completely covered in red tentacles. He made a joke because the man showed up covered in red equipment. However, the voice of the other had a flatness to it. Get up. Swoosh. All kinds of undead appeared around them. Even Heidegger's companion who had his head blown up got up. Heidegger's expression stiffened. An impossible performance for corpse sorcerers. There was only one monster who could do this. Lich. Muyang stared at Heidegger. The Black Sun Warrior was not an opponent for Heidegger. Although Muyang rapidly became stronger over the 15 days, he was still around the same level as the Black Sun Warrior. If all the undead combined strength with Muyang, they would have about a 30% chance to win. I am definitely weaker than I was in the past. Heidegger started to gain notoriety after the Great Calamity had started. The power he showed then, while it might not be the top 10, it was definitely top 100 among humans. If he still had the power he had before, the Black Sun Warrior would have already been smashed into bits. Because that wasn't the case, he had a 30% chance of winning. Plenty of things could change within 10 years in the underworld. It was obvious he would be incomparably weaker than his past self. This bastard is careful. Knows a lot. That's why he'll mistake me. His thoughts were correct. Heidegger took Muyang for a lich. Liches were the leaders of the undead who controlled top-ranked monsters and armies. The people who could fight against a lich by themselves were almost non-existent. There were even stats that claimed it would normally take 50 Knights of Justice buffed with a high-ranked sacred blessing to fight against one lich. On top of that, Muyang knew a little bit about Heidegger's personality. Heidegger never took risks, so he wouldn't recklessly rush into this. Why is a lich here? The undead don't roam this place, Heidegger cautiously said as he kept his guard up against the more than 100 undead. If he's under a delusion, then I need to use it. If he fought straight on against him, his probability of winning would go down further. Instead of risking it, he believed using this misunderstanding to his advantage was best. Everything near the crater is my land. You attacked one of my undead here. What? I'm telling you, that bastard attacked me first. Heidegger became frustrated. It was like he was apologizing after getting slapped in the face. Although he was a bit special compared to normal liches, since he could create and control undead, he couldn't find any other conclusions. And because Muyang was completely hiding his spirit, Heidegger was unable to tell if he was weak or strong. Honestly, the undead around him weren't very high-ranked, so it was confusing. However, one mistake could be the difference between life or death. I guess it hasn't been long since he founded his own area? The crater was originally a territory that belonged to the Pyroxes. No, it better to call it a hands-off area. It seemed like it hadn't been long since the Lich took over the crater, as it was his first time hearing about there being an owner here. He could understand the low-ranked undead if that was the case. Of course he couldn't attack. Liches were strong even by themselves. It was becoming more and more of a headache the more he thought about it. Muyang said something a step later because he knew this. Pay with your death. Whoa. Calm down. I don't have any desire to fight you. If you act like you didn't see anything, I will quietly leave. How's that? Heidegger lifted both his hands as if he had no intentions of fighting. His expression showed hurriedness. Heidegger was self-obsessed. So obviously he considered his life more important than anything else. His creed was not to fight fights that he might lose. His viciousness would always be biased towards weaklings. Muyang pondered for a moment before raising a single finger. Good. But I will only let one of you survive. Only one. The cats entered my territory. They are going towards the crater. It's an insignificant and annoying task to get rid of each one. So you get rid of them. He talked like he was acting out of kindness. Crater? Ah. Heidegger recalled what his companion told him before. That the person thought the woman went in the direction of the crater. Damn it. An alarm rang out in Heidegger's head. This is supposed to be a pun. Lich and rich sound the same in Korean. Fossey were the only cat-type monsters here. He didn't know why the Fossey were running towards the crater, but it probably wasn't for a good reason. If the woman died and he lost the marble? Heidegger's mind raced. If they were going to fight, it was best to get permission from the owners of the territory before they started. If the Lich was okay with them, he was able to easily get rid of the cats. Let's kill the cats. Still, the territory will become a bit noisy. I don't have a lot of patience. Muyang's emotionless eyes looked towards Heidegger, as if things would become more difficult as time went on. Heidegger coolly nodded his head as if things were moving smoothly. That's not a problem. A few tens of Fossey are no match for me. Instead, I want you to swear the oath of death. The oath of death. It was the only promise a living being could use to restrain a person who opposed death. It was to prepare for the unlikely possibility. It showed he didn't trust anyone. The oath of death was normally used by corpse sorcerers, but to do this, an item was required. Heidegger naturally took out 2 skull rings from his chest. And he quietly added some words just in case they disturbed the Lich's mood. If you just make the oath for me, then I will get rid of all those cats. Muyang laughed inwardly. Being prepared was good. You could say that Heidegger was truly a veteran, as backstabbing happened quite often in the underworld. However, the oath of death ring had no effect. It was because Muyang wasn't a dead person from the start. Would Heidegger know that extreme precaution could also lead to more danger? Muyang wore the skull ring and spoke appropriately. If you get rid of all the Fossey in my territory, I will spare your life. I will make sure I don't trespass this area after today. Heidegger had no further suspicions and completely believed that this oath was completed. If Heidegger was really a corpse sorcerer, he would have prepared a few more rings to double-check, but he either didn't have the time to do so or he lacked the knowledge. This was his best and the limit to his capabilities. Swoosh. He immediately changed his stance and kicked the ground. Muyang was able to feel his urgentness. Heidegger instantly darted past Muyang. The tip of Muyang's lips slightly lifted up as he looked back at Heidegger. Things are going smoothly. He was planning to slightly urge him as they fought, but he didn't even need to do that. He never thought Heidegger would take out the oath of death ring that corpse sorcerers used, but either way Muyang wasn't a dead man. And that mistake and off-guardedness would later strangle him. You let your guard down the most when you believe it has ended and you have won. When would be the best moment to assassinate your opponent? When they were starving to death. When they lay on the ground after using all of their strength. None of the above. It is when your opponent believed he had achieved his goal. Heidegger might believe that there were only tens of Fosse, but their numbers were over 100. It wouldn't be an easy fight even for Heidegger. And when he believed everything was over. Block the pathways to the crater. Make sure no one leaves alive. The undead spread out. Muyang moved by himself. Flutter. Muyang became part of the wind as his cape fluttered. Kai. Fosse were enraged as they saw their dead cub. They showed their teeth and in an instant they occupied the surroundings. Splat. Zap. Zap. The Fosse didn't even care about the shield of lighting created by Sorceress of Lightning. They kept running straight while they burned their skin and fur. Their sole determination for revenge. The rage they felt because of their cub awakened their fighting instincts. 10 corpses were already lying on the ground. The comrades of Heidegger who arrived slightly before them were slashed to death. You wild cats. Piss off. At that amazing timing Heidegger appeared. Fosse changed their attention to him. Humans were enemies. It was the same for Heidegger who just appeared. However, Heidegger's eyes were focused on something else than the Fosse. UB*T. His gaze only focused on to the marble of territory the woman was holding. The woman closed her eyes and lifted the marble up high. Heidegger suddenly became hasty. Kaya. A Fosse scratched Heidegger's body with its sharp claws. Few tentacles were torn, but they quickly regenerated and filled the empty space. Whoosh dash. Heidegger, who had his knees bent, punched the Fosse's side as it gnawed on him. With the sound of air exploding, a hole was made through Fosse's side. Wait for me. That was when Fosse's target changed. They realized that Heidegger was the strongest human here. Push. Thump. Clench. A Fosse dropped dead with a single punch. However, Fosse weren't afraid of death. This was the reason most monsters avoided them. You could only be astonished as Fosse continued to attack until they all died when they were enraged. On the other hand, Heidegger was alone. He couldn't stop all the Fosse that were attacking from every direction. Gah! You annoying bastards. Heidegger never thought he would lose. Just, the amount of damage was greater than he could regenerate. As the tentacles around him started to get cut off, Heidegger's strength also was greatly reduced. There were some that stuck on him and were biting his neck. However, the final winner was Heidegger. He stood there alone after a whole hour of struggling. The Fosse that numbered over 100 were massacred, but Heidegger wasn't in perfect shape either. Pant, pant. The tentacles no longer regenerated. He lost sight in one of his eyes. However, the most important thing was that he won. And what he searched for was more important than one of his eyes. You fucking B***T. You dare to take what's mine. Pale, please save me. The woman, Adisha, dropped to her knees as she was frightened. The Sorceress of Lightning who was protecting Adisha disappeared all of a sudden. However, Heidegger, who had lost his rationality, didn't care about her disappearance. Heidegger placed his hand on top of her head. I will bark if you tell me to, I will crawl if you tell me to. Please. Please spare my life. AB**Tvich who stole once can do it again. He slowly placed more strength in his hand. The woman twisted her body, but Heidegger didn't loosen his grip. Blood rushed towards her head. Pop. It exploded. After Heidegger shook off the brain parts from his hand, he picked up the marble of territory as it rolled onto the ground. He completed the marble after taking the other half from his dead comrade. It's good enough that I found it. Heidegger laughed out loud as he looked at the completed marble. Even if he lost all his companions and lost sight in one of his eyes, compared to them, this marble was priceless. I'm gonna be king. An ancient trial he found by coincidence. Heidegger was planning to build a castle here and become the king. This marble was going to be a very important item in building the foundation. Strength of a king. If I could just make it mine. He felt thrilled just by thinking about it. Not just an outlaw but to reign as the king of the outlaws. As he had finished his work, all that was left for him was to return. It was when he loosened up his shoulders. A sudden blow. He sensed something. However, it was already too late when he did. He barely avoided a critical injury, but he was able to feel his body being pierced through. Yo, you. Heidegger could only be very surprised as he quickly turned around to find out who the opponent was. Lich. I'm not a lich. Myung told him the truth. What? Heidegger was at a loss for words, but Myung didn't even give him a chance to get himself together. Shadow teleportation. The ability that allowed you to teleport to a shadow 3 times a day. This shitty bastard. Clang. Heidegger smacked away the dagger Myung threw. Heidegger reacted right away as the dagger was thrown high in the air, but Myung was a bit faster. Acceleration. Myung was able to double his speed for 3 seconds as he used Hermes's boots. Heidegger wouldn't be able to block Myung's attacks as he was already exhausted to the full, and even his defensive ability was greatly reduced. Swoosh. At the same time, when Heidegger turned around to aim for Myung, Myung used the shadow teleportation once again. At that moment, Myung teleported to the shadow of the dagger Heidegger smacked away. The shadow of the dagger appeared on Heidegger's head. Myung was able to teleport to any shadow within his vision. Anguish accurately stabbed his head. The tentacles blocked it, but Myung was able to pierce through all walls of protection as Anguish was already strengthened for quite a lot. Thump. Heidegger's body dropped to the floor with eyes that couldn't still grasp what exactly happened. Myung took off his helmet. After identifying Myung's face, Heidegger's eyes completely widened. You weren't a lich. Foley. Myung held Heidegger's head as it was drooping down. Do you want to live? Completely emotionless eyes. A swamp. Heidegger was being swallowed by a swamp. Heidegger used his last bit of strength to slowly nod his head. No matter how many people he had killed, he valued his own life. Like I promised, I will let you live. At the same time, a slight bit of hope appeared in Heidegger's eyes. That was right. What if he isn't a lich? Heidegger still had the Oath of Death ring. The two definitely made an oath on the ring. That Myung would let him live if he got rid of all the cats, the Fosse. It still wasn't too late. If Myung would just let him survive, Heidegger could live with his fast regenerative abilities. Heidegger hoped and wished for it to happen. There was hope, and Myung was the only one who could give it to him. Unfortunately, the Oath of Death ring didn't work on Myung as he wasn't dead in the first place. Myung took off the ring. He threw it on the floor and stepped on it. And quietly whispered. As an undead. Not really dead or alive, but in the form of an undead. Could you call it alive? But Heidegger couldn't even refute. Heidegger lost consciousness as he felt his soul being sucked in. Heidegger will be regenerated as an undead. Plus high level of regeneration. Plus addition stats following heart, werewolf's heart, all stats +9. Plus dance of tentacles. A skill to strengthen the muscles is usable. He was much stronger than the Black Sun Warrior, which was his best undead he had made so far. It was an obvious result when you think about how Heidegger overpowered the Black Sun Warrior. There must be a limit as my skill rank is low. However, it was much less of a limit than he had expected. As his Art of Death skill was only AC rank, it seemed like Heidegger's strong powers weren't applied properly. But this was enough. Even if the Art of Death skill was close to a universal skill, it could be considered as a god's authority if he could just reproduce a strong person to an undead as exactly as he was when he was alive. He didn't know what would happen if he raised his rank further, but he knew he wasn't at that level yet. However, it had to mean something as the Black Sun Warrior was the last undead to receive a score over 80. Where were you planning on using the Marble of Territory? Heidegger opened his one eye after he healed his injuries. King Merduden's relics. It's buried. Heidegger spoke with a voice that kept cutting off. Myung clenched his fist tightly. As he expected, Heidegger was completing an important trial. The relics of King Merduden. It was unexpected. Merduden was an ancient Murloc king. Even though the Murlocs were weak, low-ranked monsters, Merduden was a very remarkable monster among them, as he was mentioned in some of the ancient literature that were rare to find in the underworld. Even the top-ranked monsters avoided King Merduden. It was told that when Merduden was the king of Murlocs, the Murlocs were much stronger and revealed different kinds of miracles. Of course, not everything written was true. However, even if half of what was written were true, then even that was amazing. He couldn't find out about any further details, but it wouldn't have been just a normal item if it was the relics Merduden left behind. Myung could understand why Heidegger decided to enter a demon god's territory even if it was dangerous. To Heidegger, the marble of territory was something he had to find. He probably wanted to call this territory his and stabilize it before he searched for the relics. It was possible that the relics played a crucial role in Heidegger gaining so much strength 10 years later. His heartbeat quickly rose. It's perfect. Myung switched his gaze. On Heidegger's right wrist, the status viewer was still working. It was proof that his achievements still valid, as he wasn't completely dead when he was turned into an undead. It was a chance to succeed in the trial and gain the relics of King Merduden. Make Heidegger into a living undead and earn relics on top of that? This was truly killing two birds with one stone. Lead me. I will continue to find the relics of King Merduden. A crisis turned into an opportunity. And Myung wouldn't let go of this chance. A remote desert area. A structure was being built in a location right behind a cliff. Pyramid. It was definitely a pyramid around 10 m tall. Tens of people were cutting, moving, and stacking huge rocks. So this is the symbolic icon he was going to use to declare his territory. To use the marble of territory, you needed a symbolic icon to define it. The symbolic icon would become some kind of totem and change the surrounding area around it. It was a type of arrangement made for humans to live in this world. And that pyramid? A king's tomb. Myung rubbed his chin. He understood why Heidegger used a pyramid as a symbolic icon. Heidegger made it for the trial in finding the relics of King Merduden. The pyramid was in its finishing stages as the people of skin and bones worked hard in moving the rocks. You came. As Myung and Heidegger entered the small village, an old man came up to them and dropped to his knees. He greeted them very devotedly as he placed his forehead onto the ground. Myung could feel he was extremely terrified. Myung could understand how Heidegger ran this place by looking at all the injuries of the people working here. As there wasn't anything that resembled a house, it seemed like they were overworked with not enough rest or food. There was only a large tent. It was probably the place arranged for Heidegger. Myung moved his gaze. Flop, flop. And about 5 people were whipping people urgently. Gah. Foam came out of a young man's mouth as he collapsed. He was whipped immediately, but as the man showed no signs of getting up, he was tossed to the ground. Like throwing away garbage. However, no one seemed to care. I'll wipe it for you. The old man went on his knees, took out a cloth and started to rub Heidegger's shoes. While he was doing it, he looked at Myung with doubtful eyes. It seemed like he didn't know how to act towards Myung. If it was a guest Heidegger brought, he needed to serve him well, but if he wasn't, he would be smacked with a club. However, Myung wasn't interested in that kind of treatment. Myung entered the tent after looking around for a bit. Heidegger was more than a king here. Everything was accomplished by his words. If he told them to die, they really needed to die. And what ruled them was complete fear. The fear paralyzed their rationality and made them into puppets. How long till it's finished? It should be finished in 2 weeks. Heidegger replied as Myung asked him inside the tent. There were only 2 of them inside the tent. It seemed like a place only Heidegger could enter. As people were shaken the moment Myung entered that place. Nevertheless, they seemed to recognize Myung as an important guest, as Heidegger never gave them any orders. Anyways, 2 weeks. That's enough time. Myung sat on a chair and rested his chin on his hand and planned his schedule for a moment. If he obtained the relics of King Merdudin, he would basically gain the most effective way to move in the demon god's territory. Afterwards he could use the Little Wish to find out where Headley's cow is. Even if it was the Little Wish, it would not be able to continuously tell him of its location. Therefore it was best to use it right before he started to search for it. Myung got up and took Heidegger's status viewer and looked through his history. He was able to find out what trials Heidegger had completed and which ones he was in the progress of completing in the history of his status viewer. It was possible to read the trials and steal from them in the progress. Relics of King Merdudin 3. In the past, Murlocs controlled water and were rulers of the lakes and the oceans. They performed all kinds of miracles using spears and staves made out of pearls. There was even a countless number of sages of the ocean. But after the death of King Merdudin, they quickly degraded and became smaller in size and decreased in intelligence. Can the Murlocs revive when someone finds the relics of King Merdudin? Extract from the time of Murlocs. The place known as the Heart of Murloc. You have found the map where the location of relics of King Merdudin is revealed. You have reached the location on the map. You can become a descendant of Murloc if you proclaim a territory and build a tomb to celebrate King Merdudin. Quests regarding the relics of King Merdudin were written in order. However, there wasn't anything that was specifically written. It was difficult to confirm specific details just by simply reading his history. However, Myung now knew that he needed to proclaim a territory to become a descendant of Murloc. How can I find the relics? Pyramid automatically becomes a dungeon. They are inside. Indeed. It meant that it wasn't simply a symbolic icon. It meant that the pyramid itself became a dungeon for a trial. It was quite an interesting story. You dungeon. There must be a lot of rewards that can be earned. It was a dungeon. They normally didn't call a dungeon if it was a place you could clear in a day or two. It was standard procedure to slowly attack towards the final level. Of course, there would be an overflowing amount of things to be gained during the process. He would have to routinely come back out to organize everything, and to do this he needed to make some changes here. It's not bad to make a territory here inside the demon god's territory. He was declaring a territory for the first time. It seemed a bit of a waste to just get the relics and leave this place alone, as the marble of territory was very rare to get. As people were already here, and depending on Myung's thoughts, it didn't seem impossible to develop this place into a territory. Even though he would only use it for a place to stay momentarily, if he became the lord of this territory and maintained the dungeon, he could earn additional profit. Like specific talismans or rare medicinal herbs. In reality, there were few cities that were built near a dungeon. It might be difficult if monsters flooded out from the dungeon, but there were still much more to gain from it. The monsters around this place are all low rank. It's not bad when I think about the future. Demon God's territory. If you made a city near the great city, everyone would keep others in check and try to steal it, but if he was to proclaim the territory here, who would interfere? It would be better to give up if there were strong monsters near this place, but that wasn't the case. It seemed possible to organize the location by releasing a few undead. Although there were less than 100 people, he didn't think it was bad if he looked far ahead. Either way, he wouldn't lose anything from trying. Protect this place. I will come back after roaming around. I understand. Heidegger stiffly nodded. Myung went outside the tent. He felt everyone's gazes, but no one stopped Myung from walking his path. Myung left the village and came back when it was night. However, countless undead were moving the corpses of giant scorpions and fire foxes behind him. He stacked them up in the middle of where people were gathered. As people looked at the small hill in wonder, Myung spoke. Eat the contents and with the rest make clothes and houses. That was all. Myung entered the tent once again. However, people were unable to move easily. In this place you needed permission to even talk. However, Heidegger didn't show any response. It was only natural, as they were a group who were basically rejected of their free will. However, even the next day and the day after, Myung continued to transport the corpses of monsters. After the fourth day, a person moved for the first time. A young man who could no longer bear the hunger greedily devoured the corpse of the firefox. And then waited for his punishment as his eyes became a bit clearer. No one survived after they acted like this. Everyone was horrendously killed by Heidegger or his comrades. However, there was no punishment. Then all the people who studied each other's faces started to move. They ate the meat of the monsters and made clothes with its fur. They built a place to stay using the huge carcass of scorpions. That didn't mean they weren't building the pyramid. Instead, they worked harder. I don't need puppets in my territory, he thought as he looked at the scene in front of him. Undead were enough as puppets. Even if Muyang was going to declare this land as his territory, he wasn't going to do much to develop this place. He needed the rest of the people to develop it on their own. To do this, he needed to revive the people's free will. The results weren't bad. As people started to loosen up, they now started to think. Who was that man? The man who ordered Heidegger around and pinned him down. The man who hunted monsters, ordered undead and brought darkness wherever he went. Who are you? They could only ask after a week had passed. Everyone nervously waited in front of the tent Muyang stayed in. That day Muyang took off his helmet for the first time. Everyone noticed his white hair, deep dark eyes and a horn on his head. Everyone was mesmerized. Muyang replied shortly. Think however you want. Everyone had doubtful looks on their eyes. They thought a new owner had appeared to replace Heidegger had shown up, but even he said to think however they wanted. It could be considered as irresponsible, but Muyang didn't care at all. I know how Heidegger treated you guys. However, I will guarantee your freedom unlike before as long as you don't raise your sword against me. Muyang wasn't the type to speak eloquently. He just wanted to state the truth. If you want to live, get up. Build up this place and develop the surroundings. After all, you guys won't be able to leave the demon god's territory. If you just stay still, you will only become food for the monsters that might raid in. He mercilessly hammered a nail in their chests. Every single word he said was true. If Muyang didn't appear, they would have been abandoned by Heidegger and would have faced a tragic end. However, things were now different. They could change. This chance was given by Muyang. However, it was completely their decision on whether they were going to accept this chance or not. I don't care what you guys think of me as. Choose whatever you want and move accordingly. Muyang wasn't self-conscious about other people's thoughts of him. Either way, these people could not leave this place, and to live they needed to struggle. He didn't need to hold on to the title as Lord because all he wanted was to reap rewards from this process. If he acted like a lord, he would have to continue to act as one, and that would only waste his time. That wasn't the best decision when he was in a situation where it wouldn't be enough if he ran everywhere. Muyang turned his back and once again went out the village. *****. The pyramid was completed in 11 days. It was 3 days faster than the expected date. Immediately Muyang climbed the very top of the pyramid, and then placed the marble of territory on an altar that was already prepared. I, Muyang, declare this territory as mine. There was no need for a grand ceremony just because he declared it. These words were enough. Blaze. The marble emitted a purple light that spread out in all directions. At the same time, Lord F. skill has been created. The pyramid shook as it slowly changed. He needed to leave before the changes really started to occur. Or else he might never be able to leave this place. As Muyang was planning to move. The Demon King of the 27th Legion, too, has been recorded in your history. Muyang's eyes widened as read the continuously appearing messages. Muyang's eyes widened as he read the continuously appearing messages. He expected to find the dungeon where the relics of King Merdudin were buried and for him to become a descendant of Murlocs, but he never expected that he would find the continuation of the Demon King of the 27th Legion quest here. Muyang had found the location of the Shrine of Gremory, the demon god of the 56th seat, when he had returned to the past and was at the Blue Temple. He earned the qualification to become the Demon King of the 27th Legion by passing the most difficult trial at a place with a hexagram, the Star of David. Afterwards he didn't gain any more clues and had forgotten about it for a bit. Gremory has 26 legions. Gremory, the demon god who held the 56th seat. It was told that she was the only female demon god, and under her were 26 loyal demon kings. Normally there wasn't a 27th demon king. And in the past, when demon gods were destroying humanity, Gremory never appeared. She was one of the few demon gods who weren't against humanity. Becoming a demon king of Gremory and gaining strength was definitely one of the choices Muyang could choose. A thorn in their mouths. That was it. A thorn in their mouths. He was planning on being a pain that would pierce through their tongues and their heads, so that he couldn't be swallowed. He would possess a strong poison that if the demon gods attempted to swallow him, they would die one after another. He never thought that he would get a clue in this place and for this territory to be the starting point. It might have been different if he never found it in the first place, but it was currently in his reach. Now it was his decision to grab hold of this opportunity or to leave it alone as if he never saw it in the first place. Grab it. He made a quick decision. To go with the flow. There was definitely a risk to it, but there was a lot more to be gained in return. It was worth the gamble. However, to do this he needed to develop this territory. Even though his first initial plans of not caring about being a lord didn't work out, he didn't care. Plans were always meant to be flexible. He needed to at least account for that much flexibility. It said that the skill had changed. Right away, Muyang opened his skills window to check what had been changed and what had been added. Skill title: The Demon King of the 27th Legion, A+. Description: The qualifications to become the Demon King of the 27th Legion. Gremory originally had 26 legions. Only demon kings were able to command the 26 legions and every one of them possessed tremendous power. First step. All basic stats are increased by 5. Skill title: Lord, F. Description: A skill only given to those who control a territory. The rank will increase the larger your territory becomes and the more your influence rises. Special structures are included as well. Methods for increasing your territory are using the Marble of Territory or gambling your territory in a fight with other territory owners among others. Able to assign Territory Guardian, only one per territory, and depending on the territory, additional stats and skill are earned. Only effective inside the territory. Not bad. The newly added part in the Demon King of the 27th Legion skill was an increase in stats. It was very good if all his stats were increased by 5. And looking at how it said it was the first one, it looked like there was room for more. The Lord's skill was obvious. But he was a bit interested in the Territory Guardian. These guardians that existed in each city were very strong. Not just humans, there were cases where tamed monsters or summoned creatures would become the Territory Guardian. This was because the humans chosen to be guardians would frequently betray it and the territory would collapse. Anyways, it was best to choose someone who you could trust, and in that part Muyang had no worries, as there was no way an undead would betray him. Status. He decided to check the changes in his stats as well. As soon as he turned the status viewer, his status appeared. Achievement effect dash. Gremory's Anguish, A. +3 to all abilities. Azura's Vassal, A. The strength to deal with spirits and devil's power. Spirit ability increased by 10. Soulmate B+. From now on, if you commune with an undead, the undead stats will slightly increase permanently. Descendant of Murlocs B+. Increased growth of Murlocs. Fairy's Blessing B. Allows fairies to feel familiar with the user. Class effect dash. Death Lord Lord class Ruler of Death. Sets dash. Strength 112, 80 plus 32. Agility 124, 91 plus 33. Stamina 109, 84 plus 25. Intelligence 77, 55 plus 22. Wisdom 73, 51 plus 22. Fighting Aura 73, 55 plus 18. Magic Resistance 65, 47 plus 18. Spirit Ability 43, 15 plus 28. Special note: Fighting Aura has been awakened. Completed the first metamorphosis. Equipped and invoked equipment. Anguish, Strength plus 14, Ogre's Cruelty. Lunatic Sovereign set. All stats plus 15, Stamina plus 10. Shadow Armor, it allows you to teleport to a shadow within your vision 3 times a day. Wicked Belt, Intelligence and Wisdom plus 4. All undead are strengthened by 5%. And Hermes's Boots, Agility plus 15, 3 seconds of acceleration. Although his supporting effects were quite significant, his physical stats were all over 100. And since his other core stats were almost all above 70, you could say his growth was outstanding. Also, It was surprising that his basic stats had increased by 5 when he received the additional effect of the Demon King of the 27th Legion skill. Because of that, he was approaching the limit known as the First Awakening. I've already experienced metamorphosis. I wonder if another change will occur when my important basic stats are above 100. Of course, since everyone was different, there was no need to have every stat above 100. If they were close, they would experience an awakening. However, Muyang had already forcefully experienced the first metamorphosis through Vice Chieftain Ogre. But he was curious if he would undergo another physical change once he breaks through the approaching wall. At this rate, he would know in the near future. It was something that he would know only after his body had experienced it. It was the same for the descendant of Murloc's achievement effect. He was currently unsure what it entailed. But I have to get out of here. He had wasted too much time checking the changes. Muyang quickly moved away. A purple light submerged the territory. The dead land changed and revitalized. Grass grew and a small pond formed. A phenomenon that occurred only because Muyang became the owner of the territory. Land humans could live on was completed. And Muyang, who had exited the pyramid, couldn't help but frown. Please accept us. An old man and around 90 people behind him bowed. They folded their legs and kneeled. A typical posture of submission. I did tell them to do whatever they wanted, but only a few days have passed. Accept you? When Muyang asked, the old man raised his head. We sincerely ask you to become our new owner. It was all so sudden. The old man, who continued to look at him, said, We are all weak. We could only hold our breaths under Heidegger's tyranny. However, you said to do whatever we want. We put our heads together and thought. In the end, we realized the only way to live was this one. So you're telling me you will live leaning on me? A last-ditch effort for survival. Since he decided to grow his territory, it wasn't bad, but it didn't mean he would accept them as they were now. The old man nodded his head at Muyang's sarcastic remark. Yes, we want to live. We know you are different from us, but we want to believe your words that you won't make us live in constant fear like Heidegger. We will grow and develop. We all agreed to be citizens of your territory, so our lives will be in your hands. He said that he would give Muyang the authority to decide their life and death to survive. Though it was contradictory because it was Muyang liked it. Since it was more honest than speaking in circles with flowery language. Could be the strength of the experienced. He was able to understand Muyang's motives and speak without constraint. It still wasn't bad. Not everyone could quickly realize reality. It was easy to say, but his decisiveness was praiseworthy. The experiences he possessed were definitely valuable. It seemed like it would be useful in the development of the territory. Muyang gazed at each of the 94 people's eyes. A light of hope shone in their dying eyes. At the very least, they didn't look like puppets. He wanted everyone to be citizens with free will. Muyang nodded his head. I accept. Perhaps it was because the rank was so low, but it increased just by accepting citizens. And becoming a lord was similar to founding a guild. But what was different was that he would be able to force them. Those who refused Muyang's summons would be penalized. They would be cursed, and there were even cases where they lost the power of their talismans. Solomon arranged this in hopes of uniting humanity. Although there were cases where this was abused. Also, as long as Muyang didn't die or no one stole the territory, they would forever live affiliated to the name Muyang. The word citizen carried that much weight to it. I will not take those who stop and fall behind. If you want to follow me, you have to advance yourselves. Even then, Muyang clearly drew a line. He had no time to wait for those who fell behind. We greet our lord. The old man shouted loudly with a serious face. We greet our lord. And the rest opened their mouths in unison. Muyang slowly returned to the tent once again. Everyone turned their bodies towards the tent and kneeled. This ceremony continued until the sun set and the moon rose. 24 hours had passed. At the same time, a short message appeared. Muyang immediately headed for the dungeon. But there were a few people who arrived before him. One young man and woman as well as the old man. The old man spoke when he spotted Muyang. Lord, they are young and quick children. They will be helpful to you. The two definitely looked more fit than the others. They were also the only good-looking man and woman. They wore pelts that barely covered their important parts and had a dagger made from the carcass of the desert crayfish. They thought of themselves as porters as they were even holding bags. The two deeply bowed towards Muyang. I am called Baltan. Lord, I am Irene. Muyang momentarily looked at the old man. He could read the obvious motives for bringing the two. He was trying to develop promising children. It wasn't possible for everyone to become strong at once, so he was trying to send out the ones with potential. Muyang pondered for a moment and said, "Follow me." It wasn't bad for his citizens to get stronger, since it would allow him to claim the surrounding territories more quickly. He didn't see any other motives besides that. Baltan and Irene nodded with serious expressions. Muyang entered the dungeon with quiet footsteps. The inside was completely restructured. The hallway became much wider and the ceiling was higher. The fishy stench emanating out from everywhere was enough to make anyone's nose crinkle. No need to waste time. First he had to find the path. He immediately summoned all his undead. Prince and the Avengers, Blazing Spear Soldier, Sorceress of Lightning, Black Sun Warrior, and even Heidegger. Walk around and find the path. Looking at the undead and Muyang, Baltan and Irene's eyes widened. Heidegger was an undead. Although Heidegger wasn't known as being incredibly strong among humans, his special regenerative powers made fighting him very difficult. But if he was an undead, it meant he had already died. It was the first time they saw him get summoned like this. These two couldn't help but wake up at the skills only a top-ranked monster, the Lich, would have. A single Lich could decimate a moderately sized city. 50 to 100 of the strongest paladins with the strongest light blessings were needed to suppress one. However, the only city that had that many was the holy city Mulalin. An appearance of a Lich was enough to make all large organizations tense. He doesn't look like a Lich? This man who suddenly appeared one day. He was a goblin. He had white hair and a horn that was the symbol of a goblin king. They had never heard of a goblin who turned into a Lich. It was even weirder for a Lich to save humans and become their lord. Follow me properly. Muyang turned his head and said to the two who were still stuck in their thoughts. They never thought to follow along absent-mindedly. Although the two had followed him here to gain experience and to get stronger, a larger reason was to figure out what kind of person their lord was. Since they didn't know anything. But did he wait for them? His eyes that flashed dangerously, warning them not to bother him, was the same as before. They thought that he would cold-heartedly work alone, so it was unexpected for him to say something and wait for them. Sorry. We will catch up right away. Baltan and Irene woke up from their thoughts and quickened their pace. Only then did Muyang start to move. There wasn't much on the first floor. There were only frog-like murlocs and trap monsters like mimics. They went up to the second floor in a day. Although the dungeon was wide, they were able to find the path because the undead split up to find the way. We rest here today. The second floor. This was the territory of murloc crawlers. Murloc crawlers were large 3M frogs that spit out poisonous fog from their mouths. Only the poison was meant to paralyze its victims, so it had no effect on the undead. It wasn't very difficult, but Muyang went out of his way to find a place to rest. Hoo. You have incredible stamina. Baltan quietly followed along. Only Irene would try to start a conversation with Muyang. She was especially interested in Muyang. She would attach a meaning to each of his actions and didn't try to hide her amazement. Her actions were probably in hopes of getting a little bit closer, but unfortunately, the man she was looking at wasn't the type to accept everything. Muyang sat down and took out a talisman. Drink it. Thud. Irene caught the water-producing magical item he threw. Kua. Refreshing. The drink of the gods was here all along. Then she took out a rag from her bag and wiped her sweat. She tried her best to look enchanting while doing so, but Muyang didn't pay much attention. On the other hand, Baltan stared at Irene. Irene gave him a "what are you looking at" warning with her clenched fist. Baltan quickly coughed and turned away. Anyways, I've never heard of a symbol turning into a dungeon. It's really an amazing place. There should be some. Yes. Muyang, who was quiet this whole time, answered. And Irene, who heard that, was surprised. She had only asked. She never expected to hear an answer. The floating city, the territory at Cliff's End, the village of Dawn. Their symbols changed into dungeons and are self-sufficient off of it. So there are places like that? Her reaction was like it was the first time she had heard of them. The tips of Myung's eyes slightly twitched. How long has it been since you've arrived in the underworld? 8 months. Heidegger probably didn't kidnap you in a great city. Did you get kidnapped since you left to a different city in those 8 months? Heidegger would most likely kidnap people in remote cities. They were probably kidnapped in a place without any strong people. Irene looked weak. He thought that they would have spent at least 2 years in the underworld before moving to a different city, but they didn't. I have quite an adventurous spirit. Though I ended up like this. Irene's shoulders drooped. If it was only 8 months, it was possible she didn't know of the cities Myung mentioned. As they weren't commonly discussed places. It was similar to villages where only the people who knew. Lord. How do you know all those places? Irene was excited like a child. It was like he was human. So she asked him, but Myung was silent. He had returned to his previous state. But Irene's eyes became more lively. He had replied once. It meant that he was interested in them. It was the same today. If they didn't rest, they would have been able to go to the 3rd floor. She was positive he had specifically found a resting place for Baltan and herself. Since they really were about to collapse from dehydration. Is he just bad at showing it? Or are his real intentions something else? Although Irene thought that his cold eyes and attitude were unmatched, she believed that he wasn't really a bad person. Gasp. 4th floor. The strong poison spurted out of the cloud-eyed Murloc's mouth landed on Baltan's foot. The strength of the poison was second to none, as it would make one's skin and organs rot with a single touch. Black lines started to spread as the poison dissolved his flesh and entered his bloodstream. Are you okay? Irene dropped down to extract the poison. That moment. Stop. Myung, who had finished off the cloud-eyed Murloc at some point, raised anguish. Slice. And he relentlessly cut Baltan's leg. Jerk. Baltan screamed in pain. Irene, who saw this, frowned and stared at Myung. Wait. We could have just extracted the poison. Why did you? Looks like you have a lot of time. Myung turned around. And slowly walked away. He was right. They didn't have a lot of time. Irene quickly took out some rags and tightly wrapped them around Baltan's thigh. Baltan and Irene only got this far by helping each other out. Although they weren't a couple, they were closer than anyone. She couldn't lose her friend in a place like this. Irene. What do I do? You're bleeding too much. Go follow the Lord. Shut up. Before I shut it myself. As there wasn't enough fabric, Irene took off her clothes and wrapped them around his leg. And she actually crammed the leftover fabric to shut Baltan's mouth. We'll be able to leave soon. Just endure for a bit. Irene put Baltan on her back. But Myung's walking pace didn't slow. What a cold-hearted person. At first she thought he was just bad at expressing himself. But that wasn't the case. He was completely heartless. Looking at how he didn't give her the time to take out the poison and sliced his leg without any hesitation, he wasn't different from anyone else living in the underworld. Irene knew that the one who called themselves strong were all unequally cruel. They only looked at efficiency. Those that were a hindrance, they would toss them aside. She didn't want to be that kind of person. So she wasn't going to leave Baltan behind. However, it was impossible to leave by herself. Either way, Myung held the answer. Irene clenched her teeth and followed behind Myung. Baltan's heartbeat was slowing down every moment. His cold body drooped. Irene instinctively knew he wouldn't last long like this. If he was a normal person, he would already be dead. He was only able to endure this far because he was transported to the underworld and had strengthened his body. Huff, huff, huff. If she couldn't follow him, that was the end. So Irene became more desperate. Her body was burnt out and her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop moving. Myung quickly cleared the mob of Murlocs. He cleared them without rest. It was like he had become a typhoon. Without realizing it, they were already on the 7th floor. They moved without rest since the 4th floor. Normally they would have returned to the village and took some time to organize themselves. However, he thought that there was no need if he could clear it in one go. This is the final floor. The final form of the Murloc Eater was here. As there were no sightings of murlocs stronger than this, he thought the next floor was the last. In the first place, murlocs weren't very strong monsters. They were to the point where it would be a waste to use the Art of Death skill on them. They were only difficult because they used poison, but even that wasn't a problem for Muyang. Most poisons would be immediately absorbed by the spirits in Azura's path. And Muyang himself had high resistance to poisons. All the materials Ogre used to forcefully make him undergo metamorphosis were extremely poisonous. To the murlocs, Muyang was their natural enemy. If one could avoid their poisons, they were only slightly large frogs. And once he entered the next floor, a small message appeared. A single sentence. However, the monster that appeared had an incredible presence. Crush. A 10 tall stone statue of a frog broke and the murloc chief stepped out. It was definitely stronger than all the murlocs he had killed up until now. However, its actions were awkward. There were places that were still petrified. It looks like I arrived before it was released from its petrification. Muyang grinned. It looked like it didn't expect a challenger to arrive so quickly. For Muyang, this wasn't bad. It meant that he could finish this that much quicker. Soon, a thick poisonous fog spread around him. The movements of the undead became sluggish. Poison shadow. Muyang released all 33 spirits. The crazy spirits of Azura's path. Hiya. As soon as the spirits started to go crazy, Muyang's eyes became red as well. The spirits whispered. To slice its flesh and devour its blood. To rip apart the enemy. Kill. Muyang charged forward saying one word. Stomp. Stomp. Fem. Muyang pierced through the poisonous fog and moved with the undead. Blitzkrieg. He dashed forward with only offense in mind. Though it was an awe-inspiring scene, everyone including Muyang was engulfed in their desire for destruction. Sith. Crush. The murloc chief collapsed. His whole body was sliced apart and it met a pitiful end. But even Muyang wasn't completely fine. Crack. He forcefully pushed his dislocated joint back into position. He cut off his bruises and extracted his blood. Irene was speechless as she motionlessly looked at Muyang. She would never forget the fight she had seen just now. He charged forward with only attacking in mind. It was something only those who didn't care for their lives could do, and it was beyond intense. Although she had seen a few of the strong show their strength before, she had never seen anyone bring forth as much destructive power as Muyang. Whoosh. Soon, the poisonous fog dissipated and the marble of territory rose from the center of the floor. Muyang slowly approached the marble of territory. And the moment he placed his hand on it, zing! Behind the marble of territory, a large door appeared. The place where the relic storage of Murloc King Merdudin was sealed. He had quite the expectation as Merdudin held the title of a king. And a small door was created beside it. His prediction was correct. These types of dungeons had a gate that led to the entrance when they cleared the final floor. Muyang looked back. You can get out if you pass through the small door. A short speech. On the other hand, you can earn a great reward if you enter the large door. He gave them a choice. The reason why Muyang led the two was simple. It was highly likely for the citizens to be reorganized with those two in the center. The old man saw high potential in the two and sent them to go with Muyang. The dungeon didn't disappear just because you cleared it. He was planning to have them finish exploring the final floor and understand the structure to have them lead others in clearing this dungeon. Exploring the dungeon was a lot more effective in getting stronger than running around the demon god's territory. There was a less chance for any random variables and a chance to earn additional profits. This was the cheapest way to make his citizens stronger. What choice will you make? At the same time, he was curious. Was it because it had only been a year since they entered the underworld? Irene seemed to be full of justice. She was clueless, but it was amazing to see someone with that much upright character in a place where people had already lost their conscience. Also, she maintained her bright personality even when she was used as a slave under Heidegger. That meant it was in her nature. This characteristic was different from a hero's, but Muyang knew that heroes were made from the gatherings of these types of people. Then he could only inwardly laugh. She's different. He would have killed Baltan right away when he was poisoned if it was like when he just returned to the past. Muyang saved him and was now giving Irene a chance to choose. It meant that he had changed slightly from how heartless he was in the past. He wouldn't hesitate to kill with a reason, but these two were his citizens. It meant that he could flexible for things he considered his. Murloc's dungeon. It would also hurt his pride if he was to remove them in a place like this just because his baggage increased. Of course, it would be the end if Irene entered the large door to earn a reward. It would reveal that Muyang was simply mistaken. It was one of humans' natural instincts to expect a reward after experiencing hardship. He had no plans to scold her. "Lord, I will go through the small door." Without even the slightest hesitation, Irene moved towards the door. Muyang seemed quite content. He proved that the image she had shown until now wasn't a lie. Soon it became quiet on the top floor. Then, one made a choice and Muyang was the only one left. And Muyang approached the large door. As they passed through the small door, the entrance of the dungeon came into her sight. We really did return. Even though she was out of her mind due to complete exhaustion, she squeezed out the last bit of strength in her to move. Right away, she looked for the old man to ask him to treat Baltan. The only one who had knowledge of medicine was him. However, there was definitely a limit in treatment in a place where they lacked medicinal herbs and facilities. The old man's expression hardened and Irene had reached the peak of her impatience. At that moment, Baltan opened his eyes. "Baltan. Irene. You're awake? Wait a moment. You are being treated right now." Baltan smiled weakly. Baltan knew well of his current body condition. "Irene. Save your words. You're bleeding too much. Lord, don't blame him. He, to save me, did his best." "What do you mean?" "I didn't lose conscience inside the dungeon. I kept watching. For some reason he gained a bit more strength. It was like when people suddenly gained energy when they were just about to die." Using this time, Baltan continued to talk. "My skin rotted right away when the poison touched me. If he didn't cut it off right away, my skin and organs would have rotted and I would have died a painful death. It was the same meaning when he stopped you from using your lips. If the poison touched you in an instant, it would have rotted your body. You're saying that he cut it off to save you?" Irene looked at him as if she couldn't believe in what he was saying. However, things shouldn't be left misunderstood. Baltan wanted to at least resolve her misunderstanding. "After I was hurt, we headed for the final floor without a single rest. He knew that a door that led to the entrance would appear when he finished the boss. If it wasn't the case, there was no reason for him to risk getting in danger and rush recklessly." He continued to talk as he swallowed down his saliva. "Even if that wasn't the case, we need to believe in him. If it wasn't for him, we would have all died. You should know yourself, as you have also faced Heidegger's tyranny. So, you shouldn't think ill of him. Since we didn't actually provide him with any help." I understand. I understand, so just calm down. Your wound opened. Promise in front of me that you won't blame him, that you will trust and follow him." "I never blamed him from the start. I just thought he was a heartless man. However, I won't even think of him that way. From now on, our Lord is my sky, the sun and the ocean. Bong, please." I wanted to hear those words. Baltan smiled as he lied back down. There were a lot of people who were saved by Irene's personality. Baltan was also one of those people. However, he couldn't let her make the worst decision. He was on the edge of his life, but he needed to make things right even if it meant pushing himself. "Please look after us." Baltan prayed. As he entered the storage room, these words appeared. "First to enter." Whatever it was, the first normally received the most rewards. Right away, Myung looked around. A smoky scent. Different types of items were squeezed in different places without being organized. It's very different from the storage room of the fire tars. At least that place was well organized. However, this place, it resembled a garbage dump. Myung slowly looked around and held each and every item. They're all too old. There wasn't anything that wasn't rusted. They had this appearance as it had been thousands of years since the storage was created. And because no one had taken care of them. However, not everything was like that. There were a few items that kept its original shape after a long time. This was here. Among the equipment, less than 10 that were in good condition, and one caught his attention. Myung held a skull-shaped necklace in his hand. Name, skull accessory. Rank A. Classification, A keepable type. Durability, 1988. Effect, it was an accessory used by the lunatic lich. As of now, there is only one skull, but you can increase the number of skulls to at most 5. To increase the number, you can extract the head of your opponent and use this necklace to automatically minimize it into a skull that will be added to the necklace. Asterisk, your stats increase by the number of heads you extort. Asterisk, currently 1 head is equipped. Asterisk, head of Jukchiho, strength, agility +4. Since it had been so old, its durability was cheap, but the effects were good. That meant that he could make a skull-shaped accessory using the heads of the people he killed. Depending on the characteristics of the added head, stats and other things would increase. The reason why Heidegger in the past was chased by every large group. So that was it. This skull necklace was one of the equipment the past Heidegger wore. When the Great Calamity started and when Heidegger started to become more active, he searched for heads to add to his necklace. And he collected the heads of the strong members of the 9 guilds and the 5 great clans. Due to the grotesque stories, he was even named Head Hunter. He got it here. He calmly acknowledged it and placed the necklace around his neck. The durability was cheap, but it wasn't like there wasn't a way to repair it. Either way, I need to find the 3 pickaxe sack alliance after I catch Headley's cow. It would be time to create an equipment with all the materials he had after he obtained Headley's cow, in the shape of a phoenix. To do this, he thought of the 3 pickaxe sack alliance. The alliance created by the dwarves. As dwarves were beings often used by others here and there, they lived in hiding in a very deep place. Muyang already knew of a way to get to that place. There was no one who could catch up to a dwarf when it came to creating things like weapons and armors. With a phoenix, he could create an equipment that was at least an A++ rank. Even broken equipment could be repaired then. Muyang continued to move and search for the next reward. And stopped in front of a small pot. It seems to be in good condition. It didn't make sense for most items to be rusted while this pot was in good condition. He could have just passed it, but as it didn't have even the slightest chip, it grabbed his attention. And on top of that, the spirits are reacting. The spirits of Azura Path were reacting to the pot. To be exact, they were reacting to the thing that was inside the pot. Myung placed his hand inside and took out an ink black marble. This is... No descriptions popped up. Not even when he used the Eye of the Sky skill. So Muyang released the spirits. And all the spirits started to attack the marble. Crack. Finally, the marble cracked and a blue light shined out from within. Merdudin. Muyang frowned. A familiar illusion formed inside the blue light. It was none other than the Murloc king Merdudin who existed in ancient literature. Muyang raised his right hand. The spirits stopped their attack. "Oh, do you know me? Murloc king, why were you trapped inside a pot?" "Was I trapped in there?" "I don't know. I was talking with Dantalion." "Dantalion? Are you talking about the 71st seat?" "Yeah, that fellow. He said he would tell me the origin of my birth, so I decided listen out of curiosity. To me, the king of the ocean, time is such a dull thing." "How long was he talking about?" Muyang couldn't help but be doubtful. "Didn't the underworld open 100 years ago?" "Huh. Where did my body go?" "You died. A long time ago." "What?" "No, now that I think about it, I don't seem to have any physical senses." Merdudin was shocked after examining his body. "You're not joking, right? If you can't believe me, I'll show you." Muyang went out of the storage. He then showed Merdudin the Murlocs as he descended the dungeon. Perhaps it was due to the spirit of Merdudin, but the Murlocs did not attack Muyang. And after checking the condition of all the Murlocs, Merdudin slammed the ground in regret. "Those things aren't Murlocs. Why have they all become dimwits?" "As expected, they are different from the past. The Murlocs degraded after you died." "Kah! Dantalion, you bastard. You tricked me." Merdudin, who realized this fact all too late, trembled in anger. "Ah! I will grind your body and feed it to the fishes." He died without knowing he died. Although it was partly due to the simple-mindedness of Merdudin, demon god Dantalion's abilities were incredible as well. You can't listen to his secrets. If you listened to Dantalion's secrets, your physical body would be restrained. It seemed like Merdudin didn't know that. What are you going to do? If you decide to go back now, I won't stop you. However, if you follow me, I will help you get revenge on Dantalion. It doesn't seem right to call it following. However, damn. I have no choice. He was furious at the fact that Dantalion tricked him. After thinking for a long time, Merdudin spoke. Hey, if I can kill Dantalion, I can do anything. Soon after, Merdudin subdued the murlocs around him and went inside Muyang's body. Descendant of the murlocs activated. The murlocs slowly start to grow. The growth of murlocs. They will be good rivals. The citizens and the murlocs would compete with each other to survive. It seemed like it wouldn't be bad if they both grew and gained a form of rivalry. Soon after, Merdudin came out of Muyang's body. Unlike the other spirits, Merdudin was quite free. Azure Path? What is this place? It's filled with crazy fellows. If my instincts are correct, it seems like you should conquer this place first. However, the number of spirits I can handle is too small. I'll increase that number soon. It looks like something will happen when you conquer it. It will definitely strengthen my spirit and become a great help for you as well. It's been a long time since I've stepped on this kind of battlefield. Merdudin was excited. It seemed like he was slightly affected by the madness of Azure Path. Merdudin re-entered his body and Muyang exited the dungeon. After he left the dungeon, Muyang stayed a few days in his territory. Baltan was still in critical condition, but Irene's gaze or actions towards Muyang had changed. He didn't really pay attention to it, but you could call it a change. However, he couldn't stay here for too long. Even if this was his territory, he had things to do. Little wish. Muyang took out the cloud-shaped object. The item that allowed 3 small wishes. It was time for him to find the Headley's cow. Note for those that read Dungeon Defense, Korean commenters were commenting about how Dantalion's back at it again. He took off a corner of the cloud. To be exact, 1/3 of it. Gulp. He swallowed it without hesitation. Muyang shivered his whole body for a moment. Afterwards, both his eyes were bloodshot and he was bleeding from every pore on his body. Little wish. Whatever it was, if something you wished for came true, it wasn't far from calling it a miracle. That kind of miracle, there was no way it would come true just because you used it. The one who conducted miracles. There was a need for the person who asks for a wish to pay a reasonable price for the wish. The little wish put a burden on the user's body to realize the wish. Similar to the thoughts that would flash through one's mind when they were about to die, the little wish could be said to use one's soul to the fullest. Then a greeting passed in front of Muyang. What do you wish for? A beautiful woman sat on the grass. She was naked and fluttered her pure white wings while she looked at Muyang. Every inch of her resembled an angel, but this was simply an illusion. She wasn't real and it was just set up to appear this way. She was a fake angel, an image which few tens of thousands of priests from the holy city Mulalin had made. The underworld was a place where only monsters and demons existed. How could these people who called themselves priests picture a true angel when all they've seen were countless demons and never an angel? Therefore, they were people who believed in things they couldn't see and acted only on their beliefs. Muyang was one who thought that the ones who gave them strength weren't angels but a different entity altogether. I'm looking for Headley's cow. Your wish will come true. Soon as Muyang asked, the greeting quickly died off. He didn't understand why it had to progress the wish this way, but he thought they made it like this to make the process of making a wish seem holy. West. After the greeting died off, a red line which only appeared in Muyang's eyes stretched westward. At the same time, Muyang's sight widened and a scene passed by. Dakibis are migrating towards the west. It was a mass migration. Their numbers seemed to be well above 100,000. They were walking towards some place. Among them there were quite a few kings with horns. They were all leading their respective tribes towards a single location. Muyang remembered the words Ogre had said when they first met. Adventivum. He didn't know what kind of ceremony it was. However, Ogre had once told Muyang, who he assumed as a Dakibi, that group of Dakibis were moving west. It seems like Headley's cow is hiding among them. Why would it be among the Dakibis out of all the locations? However, he was certain of one thing. All he could see were Dakibis. No other species were apparent. Therefore it was most likely that Headley's cow was currently in the shape of a duckheebe. The reason why Headley's cow is in the shape of a duckheebe. If you broaden the term, Headley's cow was a fairy. Could be doing this simply for fun, or it could have something to do with the advent of To check, he needed to go. However, he needed to rest for a bit. His whole body felt hot, like it was on fire, and he felt dizzy and nauseous. Young leaned against a wall and closed his eyes for a moment. He knew that there would be a side effect, but never thought it would affect him so much. I think I'll feel better after a nap. Young knew his current condition better than anyone else. Since he knew where Headley's cow was and where it was moving towards, he felt it was okay to move after he recovered his body. He heard the cry of a soul that was struggling to keep its life even though it was filled with death. Night. In the shadows of the dark night sky, Young followed the traces and searched through a desert. Baltan. It was him. He was dying. The fact that he wasn't treated immediately put him in a critical situation. He was holding on with pure willpower. But Young was able to instinctively find this place after he woke up from his sleep due to the little wish's side effect. He had already seen countless deaths, so how was it that only this place felt different? Lord? You're barely alive. I'm sorry about my unsightly appearance. His voice was hoarse. A haggard face that could be a corpse's. Baltan awkwardly laughed as he spoke. But it's amazing. I thought the god of death would appear, but you showed up. There is no hope. What's your reason for holding on? Baltan painfully opened his mouth. Because of this child. And he stroked Irene's head, who fell asleep beside him. Considering how she didn't wake even after this commotion, it seemed like she wasn't able to sleep for the past few days. Either way, it would be hard for me to endure past today. At most half a day. I'm sorry I couldn't be of help. I never had any expectations from the start. I know. To be honest, I was grasping at straws. We are weak and we will never be able to survive the demon god's territory like this. Cough, cough. Baltan painfully coughed out loud. Then he got to the point. I was originally planning to leave quietly, but a favor. Can I ask you for a favor? It's really a simple one. Baltan's eyes were full of desperation. Then Young was able to understand the reason why he came to this place. The ruler of death. It was definitely due to his influence. He was able to naturally understand what he needed to do. To ask me for a favor, I need your life. Baltan probably understood what Young meant by these words. It was because he continuously saw Young controlling undead. Even so, Baltan nodded his head. I'm gonna die. I'm not afraid of death. Instead, I feel my mind gets clearer as death approaches. That moment. Yes, it was this. After Susie's father, the authority activated for Baltan. He instinctively felt the traces of death and his body automatically moved because he knew it was a golden opportunity to use this authority. Speak. What is it? Would he ask to be saved? Or ask to protect Irene? Baltan forcefully raised his injured body up and kneeled. Use me as Lord's knight. So that I can protect this place even after I die. It was unexpected. He was aware of his approaching death and volunteered to become an undead. A knight. Young inwardly mocked him. To be honest, Baltan's physical stats were lousy. He was too lacking to become a sword that could protect Young, and he probably already knew this. To become a knight was just an excuse, and what he truly wanted was to be allowed to protect this territory. Baltan wanted to protect the people left behind even like this. A useless sacrifice. I thought that myself. That the underworld was a malicious place where only the selfish survive and the good die. Even now my thoughts haven't changed. But. Baltan clenched his teeth. We can't just sit here and accept it. I understood that it had to start with myself when I came to this place. To be exact, it was Irene who showed me this. Do you believe your death will change this place? Yes. He didn't have a slightest hesitation. It was arrogance. But it was worth complimenting the fact he wanted to stand up for himself without hiding behind others. In the very least, he couldn't mock that. Young turned his body. When the sun rises, you will be born again. Like a prophecy, he spoke those words before he left. And the next day, Baltan, the guardian of a territory, was born. Plus guardian of the territory, within the designated territory, All stats plus 20. Plus Cry of the Guardian, within the territory, toughness of allies increases slightly. Plus Strengthening potential, you will become stronger when you fight to protect. Plus High conservation rate, high autonomous will. Muyang newly reanimated the dead Baltan and placed the restraints of the Guardian of the Territory on him. He was able to receive an art score of 84 as his story was good and because of the power of authority. Even though he was strengthened, his stats were only at this level because he wasn't good material, but even this was amazing. There was also no way for undead Baltan to betray him. He thought that Baltan would do well in protecting this place as his memories were still intact. Strengthening potential and high autonomous will. And even though he was now an undead, he had the two things that were both hard to obtain. This was the power of authority. Normally, even if he was strengthened, since he was weaker than Heidegger, it would be a waste to make him the guardian of the territory, as there could only be one per territory. However, the story would change if he could think on his own and grow. Not only that, but he was able to recover his whole body, even his foot had regenerated. He had no problem moving. Baltan will replace me as a substitute lord for a while. Muyang announced quietly. Everyone here trusted Baltan. And just in case, he also set the prince and the Avengers here. It would be helpful if few tens of undead were there. Baltan has been born again as my knight. While I'm gone, follow Baltan and develop the dungeon and the surroundings. I will follow your order. The very first to respond was Baltan. Amazingly, he didn't speak awkwardly. Even his eyes shined as if he was still alive. Lord, may I ask where you are going? The old man couldn't hide his nervousness and asked. Muyang looked towards the red line in the air and gave a short reply. I'm going to the Soul Mountains. The Soul Mountains. It was the place where the Dakibis were conducting their ceremony. And Headley's cow was well hidden in that place. Muyang was planning to join in as the hunter. The red line pointed towards the west. However, as time passed, it became fainter. Did I arrive there already? Over 100,000 were in a line. It seemed like everyone had already arrived at the destination. In fact, it had been quite a while since he had first heard about the Dakibi's movements from Ogre. There is a need for the Hell Horse. Muyang knitted his brows. It was a bit expected, but he wasn't able to sense the Hell Horse at all. It seemed like the Hell Horse stayed at the location when he used the long-distance teleportation magical item. However, the Hell Horse mobility might be needed to catch the Headley's cow. As a Hell Horse, it would definitely be able to pressure Headley's cow, who turned into a phoenix. I guess I need to try it out first. He had no choice. He needed to try on his own even without the Hell Horse's help. Muyang diligently moved towards the west. The huge Soul Mountains. Over 100,000 Dakibis were gathered. Thump, 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 thump. They sang while they stomped the ground. It was so loud that it sounded out all over the mountains. Few thousands of tribes were gathered and different types of Dakibis were here. If you have white hair and a horn, aren't you an Ice Dakibi king? Why are you here on the Fire Dakibi side? Get lost. I'm letting you off easy since we're in the middle of the Advent of Someone grabbed Muyang's shoulder. It was a Dakibi king with his blazing red hair. An enormous figure. The Ice Dakibis and the Fire Dakibis were on bad terms. Where are the Ice Dakibis gathered? So there are even kings as foolish as you running around. It's that way. Thank you. What? He was confused as if he didn't expect to hear thanks. But Muyang didn't care and diligently headed towards the location the Fire Dakibi pointed. Among these Dakibis there is Headley's cow. Muyang was certain. He didn't know what the ceremony of Advent of for, but it seemed to be out of the ordinary. The land and magic were shaking. Just by being nearby, he felt like his soul could be sucked in. It was the reason why only Dakibis were here in this wide mountain range. And it didn't seem like Headley's cow would have joined this kind of ceremony for fun. There must be something it wanted to accomplish through the Advent of Wait for me. Who, among the over 100,000 Dakibis, could be Headley's cow? Muyang's eyes became serious. Dakibis were monsters ranked somewhere in between low and mid-rank. Although they weren't generally strong, there were certain tribes that definitely stood out among them. This was especially true for dakibis with horns who were known as kings. And depending on their characteristic, their appearance differed. You could differentiate them simply by looking at their hair color. For example, ice dakibis had white hair like Muyang. Muyang found the area where the ice dakibis were gathered. The numbers are small. At most maybe 5,000 dakibis. They only had half the numbers of others. Ahum. As if they had already practiced the chant, all the dakibis were shouting in unison. When Muyang approached them, unlike before, no one stopped him. Except there were some groups that looked at him in wonder. Why did he come alone? Is he a wandering king? Usually, dakibi kings had few tens to few hundreds of dakibis in their group. Muyang couldn't help but stand out as he was alone. However, there were no enemies. If anything, it was the opposite. Since the number of ice dakibis was small in number, they would be glad to increase their number even by one. Muyang pondered for a moment. Advent of Advent meant that he would return. There was a high possibility that was a dakibi with an important status. First, he needed to understand this ceremony. That way it would be possible to search for Headley's cow at this place without raising any suspicions. Have you seen before? The horned dakibi right next to him gave him a questioning look and spoke. Um's position was vacant for 1,000 years. Muyang inwardly nodded his head. Didn't mean a figure but a position. But for 1,000 years. It seemed like they were planning to decide their true leader at this place. He dug a bit deeper. Then, who do you think will take this Um's position from this ceremony? Well, of course it's going to be Seo Han. He's the true ruler who rules over 3,000 ice dakibis. Did you come here after living near the border? Sohan. Muyang slightly turned his gaze. There was a dakibi who stood out more than the rest. A dakibi whose skin was completely blue was receiving many gazes of confidence from others. He looks more like a yiksha than a dakibi. They were species known as duaxini, which were, in reality, evolved dakibis. Muyang only heard of them before. This was his first time seeing one. And there were at least 5 more duaxini present. Muyang retracted his gaze and answered coolly. You're right. That's why I don't know much about this ceremony. The dakibi clicked his tongue. Fortunately, he wasn't suspicious any longer and continued to speak. A black star, will fall from the sky and a trial will start and every dakibi will be able to challenge the position of However, this time things are going to be difficult as there is Seo Han. A completely boastful expression. That meant that he had that much confidence in Seo Han. A black star was going to fall from the sky? He couldn't imagine it very well. However, it seemed like they were being non-aggressive until the black star fell. He was now able to understand why the fire dakibi was completely furious. Thank you for your explanation. My name is Muyang. I'm Jayan, the one that leads the Freezing Land tribe. It seems like you're just a wandering king. Don't do anything pointless and it would best for you to help Seo Han. The two held hands. However, Muyang didn't really pay attention to Jayan's words. If it's a duaxini, he would have already led many tribes for a long time. So Headley's cow wouldn't have turned into a duaxini. It must be one of the dakibis who had just joined. First, he removed Seo Han and other duaxini from his radar. However, he couldn't easily ask this part. If he was unlucky, Headley's cow might become aware that someone was searching for it. The worst conclusion. A dakibi who joined recently. A duaxini would know. Muyang's eyes clouded. Although duaxinis were now removed from his list of suspicions, on the other hand, duaxinis would know. Which dakibis recently joined and followed them. The most certain way was to ask them. However, he couldn't do that now. He stood out too much and if he made the wrong move he could seem suspicious. After the trial starts. It seemed better to approach them at a better timing. The ceremony continued for few days. The energy within the Soul Mountains became thicker each day and during this time, everyone focused on singing the Aum song. Exactly after 7 days since Muyang joined them. Thump dash. From the sky the fell. The black star which brought the trial. A device to find out who the true was. However, there wasn't just one There were 2 black stars that fell from the sky. It's strange. It said in the prophecy that only one would fall. Jaein tilted his head. A prophecy can't always be completely correct. Myung was certain. There were many times when these things called prophecies were very vague. No, there were more times when they were wrong. This was because prophecies were received through descent of God. It literally meant that God came down upon a living being and it was impossible for that living being to listen properly. There was a high chance that through this process information became distorted or bloated up. Either way, it has now started. Jaein led his 50 tribe members and joined them. Of course, Seohan the Duaxini stood in the very front. It was the same for other types of dakibis. 2 stars that fell in the middle of the mountains. However, it was more precise to call it a meteor than a star. Although it was interesting that there was no real impact from the meteors, the 2 meteors were gathered at the top of a mountain. And there was a large gap between the 2 meteors. Myung, what are you going to do? To be honest, wandering kings are free. We can't force you. Since he had no group to lead, he also had no responsibilities. However, Myung looked a bit confident. Let's follow. Good, Myung. Then follow me. You are a guest of our Freezing Land tribe. Even though he said to follow him, it was the same as following Seohan. At the very front, leaders including Seohan discussed. And depending on their choice, they entered through the gap of the homes. It was the same for Myung and messages appeared right as he entered. Endless battlefield? Myung's eyebrows twitched. There weren't many entrances to the endless battlefield. It hadn't been long, but it was the second time he had entered. First, it was through the huge marble the fire tars had. And now it was through the black stars the dakibis called homes. Ha! He looked at his left shoulder. The number 18 was written on it. It meant that he had cleared the 18th wave before and the number would change when he produced a new record. So the trial of Hum meant the endless battlefield. He couldn't be certain. 2 Hums had fallen onto the ground. The other one could be an entirely different trial. But was it possible for this many people to enter the endless battlefield? Myung looked around. A number a bit over 30,000. It was the final number of dakibis who decided to enter here. It was small compared to the total number, but a number that couldn't be considered small were gathered here. However, from Myung's understanding, normal endless battlefields could only be entered by one person at a time. Even though it's different, the content is the same. He never heard of an endless battlefield where a great number could enter at once. Seemed to be a special version of the endless battlefield. However, the very context of the endless battlefield didn't change. Though I have heard that this was a place where you fight until you die. Just what is this place? As Jaein mumbled to himself in confusion, Myung replied in a passing tone. Soon they will come out. Myung, do you know something? They're out. A vast plain. From a distance, 2,500 goblins were approaching. And Seohan was the first to run towards the 2,500 goblins. Push. He jumped up high and charged towards the middle of the group of goblins. Afterwards, the ground started to shake as he struck the ground. Dixini. It was the strength only an evolved dakibi would have. For the trial of Hum to be merely killing goblins. Jaein spoke as if he was greatly disappointed. Seemed like he had some kind of fantasy about the black star Hum. But as he wasn't a human with a status viewer, he wasn't able to read the messages. All the dakibis were unable to see the information about the trial that Myung had seen. Therefore Myung gave them advice. This is not the end. Since he had already entered, he needed to see it to the end. If it was 30,000 dakibis, he should be able to pass the 18th wave. To do this, he couldn't let his guard down. Even if you say so, they are mere goblins. Even if more appeared, they are no match for us. Either way, let's move Myung. We can't let Seohan clear them all. In number and strength, dakibis completely overpowered them. 2,500 goblins died in less than 20 minutes. At the same time, the next wave started. This isn't the end? Jaein, who was intoxicated with the feeling of victory, blinked his eyes. Not just Jaein. Even if it was lousy, a battlefield was still a battlefield. Most of the dakibis were intoxicated with the feeling of victory. Then they were dumbfounded as they noticed other monsters approaching. It didn't end. What? This battlefield doesn't end. How many waves they clear, that wasn't important. Mu-young remembered the words that appeared when he first entered this place. Only 350 can leave here alive. It was about 1% of the total number of Dakibis who entered. That meant they had to continue to battle until there were only 350 left. Mu-young looked towards the front. They entered with the fire Dakibis and they numbered around 10,000. Like Siohan, the one leading them was also a Duaxini. Unless they were simply clearing the battlefield, they will have to bump into each other. When they realized the nature of this battlefield, they would inevitably bump into each other. The ice Dakibis and the fire Dakibis were on bad terms. Even more, since they were greater in numbers, it was obvious who was going to attack first. I need to prepare. Mu-young had strong suspicions that Headley's cow would be with the fire Dakibis. Even the one who took the position as Uma 1,000 years ago was also a fire Dakibi. The first time was hard, but the second time would be easier. They would have more information than others. In reality, unlike the other Dakibis, the fire Dakibis weren't greatly swayed. It meant that they were expecting this to a certain degree. If it was aiming for something, it would obviously side with the fire Dakibis. That was why Mu-young decided to silently prepare. Either way, this battlefield wouldn't end in just a few days. There was enough time to slowly set traps. Mu-young quietly walked towards a dead Dakibi. All goblins start off as spirits. Dakibis were normally monsters who started off as spirits. This could be seen by how they normally followed the 5 elements and used powers of the land. And the relationship with spirits and specters were quite close. Since there were times you called corrupted spirits specters, then he could definitely turn them into specters and use them. Get up. 6 paths. Among them, he opened Azura path and extracted the spirit. Spirits started to float above the corpses of the dead Dakibis and were sucked in Azura path, one after the other. And when Mu-young saw this, the tips of his lips started to wiggle. The number of specters quickly increased, which meant that many Dakibis were dying. The Dakibis were already facing the 8th wave. However, Mu-young still didn't partake in the battle. The spirit will completely separate from the bodies of the dead Dakibis after some time passes. He couldn't make the spirits into specters after the spirits have completely left the body. It took 2 days to reach the 8th wave and Mu-young already had 1,000 specters. This place was simply a gold mine for Mu-young. Swa. The spirits came out of the bodies of dead Dakibis and instantly went into Mu-young's body. Azure path. The conquest rate of crazy specters was continuously increasing in the process. The conquest rate steeply increased as the number of specters increased. Still not enough. I need more specters. Murloc King Merduden was excited to go into battle leading specters. In a state completely filled with excitement, he kept pestering Mu-young. If he continued like this, the conquest of Azura path didn't seem far away. Not even one of the 6 worlds is easy. Azura path, Hell path, Preta path, Animal path, Human path and Deva path. Mu-young had seen a glimpse of each one. They were filled with all sorts of horrors and he felt like whoever conquered those places would become a god. At least that was how Mu-young felt when he looked at Azura path. These burning glares. There were a few who glared at Mu-young for not participating in the fight and wandering around dead Dakibis. Not a lot, but it was important to note that he was getting their attention. I need to change my method. If he was to openly make undead on top of this, it would be enough for him to become an enemy of all. All the Dakibis would instantly acknowledge Mu-young as their enemy and attack him. No matter how great Mu-young was, he wasn't able to avoid the over 30,000 Dakibis in this limited area. There was too big of a risk and therefore he needed to secretly made them into undead. Plop. Left with no choice, Mu-young changed his method. He placed his hands together as if he was in praying. It sort of seemed like he was praying for the dead. Stay still. He picked out the still intact corpses out of the spiritless bunch and reanimated them into undead. But he didn't allow them to move. Since in a battlefield that continues endlessly, he had no time to waste in organizing them. Fight and die, then you will become an undead. When he turned 200 Dakibis into undeads, a change occurred. A group of various Dakibis has been completed. Like the Prince and the Avengers, it seemed like they were recognized as one. Mu-young quickly made a talisman. As he summoned the Dakibis into a talisman, the corpses turned undead magically disappeared. They were all transported into the talisman. Did I see it wrong? I think the corpses disappeared. Didn't you see how the corpses of monsters that spawned in this trial disappear? It's probably a characteristic of this place. Muyang nodded after hearing their conversation. The Dakibis who weren't familiar with talismans found the disappearing corpses strange but only thought of it as a characteristic of the endless battlefield. It was better this way. Muyang was only able to make 50 to 100 undead in a day, but through their misunderstanding he was able to speed things up. But what is that Dakibi doing? Is he trying to cleanse their spirits? He's probably just scared. This is why ice Dakibis. Of course, there were some Dakibis who didn't think well of Muyang. They clicked their tongues and looked at Muyang with disdain. Since he never participated in the battle, everyone branded him as a coward. However, he didn't care. He didn't fall for their shabby provocations. It was enough to participate in combat near the end of the battle. For now, he needed to concentrate on making undead inspectors. I am moving too fast. Muyang didn't forget to observe the situation of the battlefield continuously. Already the 10th wave. A boss-level monster appeared. About 2,000 Dakibis died by the time they faced the 10th wave. It was because they didn't know any tricks and were competing against each other. If they continued like this, they would easily clear the 20th wave, but anything beyond that seemed unlikely. Muyang, you're like a chief priest. At that moment, the king of Freezing Land tribe approached Muyang. He had injured his arm. Chief priest. Even the one who prophesied the advent of was the chief priest. He works with souls and has the right to enter the world of the universe. Like what you're doing now, his role was also to pray for the dead. However, Jain let out a deep breath and continued to speak. Right now we don't need a chief priest. It's time to fight on the front lines. Although you are a wandering king, if you a king just stand by, we the ice Dakibis will completely lose face. It seemed like he couldn't take Muyang's strange behavior anymore and had come to give him a word of advice. As they were in a place with the fire Dakibis, they took care in how they looked to others. However, Muyang silently continued to do what he was doing. Time was too precious to care about what other Dakibis thought. Not all kings are strong. Muyang, I understand if you're chief priest class of Dakibi and isn't used to fighting. At least just act like you're fighting. I, the king of the Freezing Land, Jain, will be responsible for your safety. You don't have to be responsible for my safety. Muyang tapped his waist one time. He shook anguish that was attached to his waist and showed off. Then Jain shook his head from side to side. Xiaohan is currently fighting alone and there are too many casualties. If even our prestige dies off, then everything will go to the fire Dakibis. Just leave one alone. If you kill all the enemy, the next wave starts. On the other hand, if you leave even one alive, then you could gain time to rest. If they gain time to rest, then they could reduce the number of casualties. There was a need to walk the safest path as the ice Dakibis were lacking in number. Jain widened his eyes and asked again. Is that true? What do I earn from lying to you? Muyang gave off an uncaring attitude. Just an advice. To accept it or not was their choice. That's true. I will try telling Xiaohan. Once again, Jain quickly joined the battle. And Muyang also started to pray again. He really is an odd one. What's the point in paying attention to that sort of coward Dakibi? But the enemies who appeared this time don't seem easy. I think we need to quickly go and join up with the others. The attention Muyang received quickly died off as well. Plop. The number of spirits rose and a stack of undead was made. Muyang's advice wasn't accepted in the end. It couldn't be helped. If there were only ice Dakibis it might have been different, but they were with the longtime rivals, the fire Dakibis. If they tried to leave one monster alive, they wouldn't allow it. Instead, they would speed up the battle to push them to their limits. It was the same as unknowingly walking on the path to self-destruction by only immersing yourself in the little things. Mudash. The gigantic monsters cried. To the Dakibis, these monsters with 2 feet and a bull's head were like their natural predators. They had naturally high resistance to magic and their tough hide made most attacks ineffective. The only ones that could face the minotaurs were the Dakibi kings and Duaxini. Thump. 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 The Duaxini, the ruler of the ice Dakibis, Siohan showed destructive power. Whatever his fists touched would freeze and shatter. His strength was also remarkable, and even the Minotaurs were taken back. However, Siohan was slowly getting exhausted. The other Dakibis couldn't notice, but his insides were slowly breaking down. Arlo. Siohan moved his gaze. Arlo, the ruler of fire Dakibis. Siohan couldn't act weak while that guy was still alive. Like Siohan, he evolved into a Duaxini from a Dakibi. The two were on bad terms for a long time. They fought countless times, but not once was there a clear outcome. Did it make sense to have 100 fights with 100 draws? However, it couldn't be helped. They were equally powerful. As it was obvious that if one died the other would be in a near-death state, their fights always ended up as a draw. I will beat you this time. However, this time it would be different. To win, Siohan was overexerting himself. If he was overexerting himself, it meant that Arlo was also overexerting himself. Although Arlo might appear to be fine, he thought that he was having a hard time. However, after continuously fighting the Minotaurs, he found that that wasn't the case. He isn't getting tired. On the other hand, Siohan was exhausted. How was this possible? Are the fire Dakibis this strong? By then, Siohan realized something strange. The fire Dakibis were strengthening each other. To be exact, they were sharing each other's stamina. Of course, Arlo wasn't exhausted. Since if he was, he could just take the stamina of another Dakibi. It was a skill they didn't normally have. He didn't know where they learned that kind of skill, but it couldn't be said that Arlo wasn't a wicked ruler. Siohan frowned after seeing the enemies who have just appeared. Orc Lord and Orc War Chiefs. They weren't easy opponents. Especially the Orc Lord, who was similar to Duaxinus in that they exceeded the strength of regular orcs. The fire Dakibis were the first to act triumphantly. Siohan ground his teeth. If he lost the lead, it was like he was giving up the position as was someone only those who stacked meritorious deeds acknowledged by everyone could become. I can't just stay here like this. Siohan moved. Blaze. Push. The Orc Lord sliced the flames. The ruler of the fire Dakibis, Arlo, shot. It swung its huge greatsword indiscriminately as it pushed forward. Even if it was Arlo against an Orc Lord, 1 versus 1 was difficult. A few hundred fire Dakibis quickly gathered around and shot flames, but with a single swing of its sword, a gust of wind blew out the flames. All the fire Dakibis were thrown into disarray. Arlo wasn't any different. Clash. Thump. Then a huge ice mass created in the sky smashed onto the Orc Lord. It was a great shot made by Siohan. Fuck. However, Orc Lord was even able to split that ice block in half. He thought it would definitely hit. However, the opponent who appeared before them wasn't any ordinary Orc Lord. Sword Ghost. It had a title of the Ghost of the Sword. It meant that it was well versed in swordsmanship. Without any time for the Dakibis to reorganize, the Orc Lord and the Orc War Chiefs pushed towards them. Their force overwhelmed the few tens of thousands of Dakibis. He can't see. Then some ice Dakibi king approached and stood beside Siohan. Siohan tilted his head and looked at the Dakibi who approached him. If you're going to aim both sides at the same time. If we work together with the Duaxini who leads the fire Dakibis, we could win. All ice Dakibis showed deep respect towards Siohan. However, the Dakibi in front of him didn't appear to show any signs of it. He was like emotionlessness itself. Then Siohan could only be surprised for a moment. When did he come next me? He wasn't able to notice his existence until he came right next to him. Even if he was preoccupied, it wasn't something that was possible. Who is this guy? Siohan momentarily was lost for words, but that was all. The Orc Lord continued to move. If he wasted more time, it would only lead to more destruction. That was why he had to make a decision. If he was going to trust in the words of the Dakibi in front of him and change his method of fighting, his ego would take a hit, but if they were to ask the ruler of the fire Dakibis Arlo for cooperation, he might agree to it. However, to do this he needed to be certain. Was the Orc Lord really blind? From his reaction, that certainly didn't seem to be the case. However, for some odd reason he couldn't just ignore this Dakibi's words. There weren't many Dakibis who had such a large presence. Duaxinus, who were evolved Dakibis, were able to see the nature of a being. They were able to differentiate between a truth and a lie to a certain degree. I can't see anything nor feel anything. Is he truly even a Dakibi? However, he had never experienced someone like him before. This guy's nature was emptiness itself. He was like a speck of dust that would come and disappear like the wind. However, his presence couldn't be compared to a speck of dust. All the words he said seemed to be truths. It was contradictory. However, that was the truth. What's your name? Muyang. As expected, it was a name of a Dakibi king he had never heard of. Siohan started to move again. He breathed heavily as his whole body moved up and down. If that Dakibi was telling the truth, he would be greatly recognized for his actions, while if he wasn't, he would suffer hell for deceiving him. That name, I'll remember it. You don't have to remember it. Siohan's eyes stiffened. For him to remember an Ice Dakibi's name was like infinite honor. He was the ruler of Ice Dakibis and was a war chief currently competing for the position. However, Muyang spoke indifferently as if didn't care about such things. From now on, I will let you know through Jayan. Then without any hesitation he turned his back. What kind of Dakibi is he? He was simply being disrespectful. From what he could remember, he was never treated this way even from the fire Dakibis he wasn't on good terms with. What was more, he never thought he could experience this kind of feeling from the same type of Dakibi. He could feel that the Dakibi didn't want to be exposed. Siohan was a bit taken back by his attitude, but he clicked his tongue and shook his head. There wasn't enough time. Fa. A long spear made of ice formed above Siohan's right hand. Side. The side, you say? Thump. Siohan stomped on the ground and quickly attacked the side of Orc Lord. From afar, Muyang watched the head of the Orc Lord soar. The ruler of Ice Dakibis, Siohan. Fortunately, the one to finish it off was him. He had at least saved face. Siohan. Tohan. Siohan. Ahum. The Ice Dakibis were celebrating. The process didn't matter, only the outcome was everything in this world. Orc Lord's neck was slain by Siohan, and it was safe to say that most of the credit belonged to Siohan. It's not the time yet to step out onto the front lines. From a step back, Muyang observed them. As they passed the 20th wave, there shouldn't be any major obstacles for at least a few more waves. And Muyang still had more things to do. When he decides to join the front lines, he needed to give up this gold mine. Even more, there was a chance for Headley's cow to become suspicious of Muyang. Even the advice he gave Siohan was done with a bit of risk. Currently, he didn't give any room for doubts, but if this happened continuously, it could become harmful. 5 candidates. Of course, Muyang wasn't just making undead inspectors. He searched for Headley's cow with his keen eyes. And from the fire Dakibis he found 5 who were the most suspicious. One of the candidates was a Dakibi king who recently joined and didn't have a tribe like Muyang and acted differently from normal Dakibis. To be exact, he figured this out by carefully observing the ruler of the fire Dakibis, Arlo. But if Headley's cow was here, it had to be one of those Dakibis. Muyang thought so himself. Muyang. Siohan said that he appreciates my service. It's probably because I fought so well on the front lines. Jayan approached Muyang as the excitement slowly died off. It was to boast. Congrats. Muyang mindlessly congratulated him. It wasn't bad to converse with him, as he would be the one who would pass on the messages to Siohan. As Muyang replied, Jayan nodded his head and held his nose in the air. Muyang, if you fight on the front lines, you can also earn this kind of honor. I don't have any greed in that sort of thing. You can only say that because you came from the remote region and don't know the greatness of Siohan. If you continue to watch Siohan, you will naturally gain respect for him. He was Siohan's fan through and through. It seemed like Siohan realized how Muyang didn't want to be noticed and took measures like this. It was good that he was quick-witted. Muyang stopped paying attention to Jayan. 2,000 specters were made. It was a steep pace. He had already made over 500 undead. Normally, he didn't really enjoy increasing his numbers like this. A truly strong person could do the work of a few thousand and even a few 10,000. It meant that it was much more effective to concentrate on just one. However, Muyang had the wicked belt, that strengthened every undead, and this endless battlefield was a place where he could only fight with the numbers he had. If he was to use the dead once more, then his military strength would double. Of course, it wouldn't be simple as his calculations, but either way, he believed it wasn't bad to focus on quantity as these situations were very rare. I could probably dominate over half of Azura Path. Murloc King Merdudin was leading 2,000 specters and was trying to conquer Azura Path. Conquest rate 22%. And every time the conquest rate increased, something changed inside Muyang. He couldn't be certain what that was, but he felt like he would know when it reached a certain point. Honestly, think about it. It would be too late to regret it when Siohan gets the position Muyang. As Muyang didn't show much interest, Jain gave him a small advice before he leaving. It was because the next wave had started. It's not too late to move after I become certain who the Headley's cow is. The moment he joined the front lines, his opportunity to look around would disappear. Muyang quietly watched the 5 candidates as he moved. The situation changed. To be exact, you could say Siohan accepted Muyang's advice. After cutting off the Orc Lord's head, Siohan's influence became stronger, and due to this, he was able to leave a monster alive to delay the start of the next wave. The fire Dakibis ground their teeth. However, the difference between them shortened as time passed. Siohan was getting exhausted, and on the other hand, Arlo wasn't. The rate of contribution. Both Duaxinus only cared about the rate of contribution. The one with the higher rate of contribution would be able to take the position of With that in mind, Muyang's current rate of contribution was very close to 0%. The rate of contribution is meaningless in the lower waves. However, Muyang didn't care. There were cases where one large contribution in a higher level was better than contributions for 10 low levels. Therefore, it was time to grow his strength and wait for an opportunity for now. And when they were faced with the 25th wave, a small change occurred for Muyang. As he got closer to 50%, the shape of his pupils changed as they became redder. At first he didn't know. However, he happened to look at his reflection through a sword of one of the corpses and saw this change. That he was changing. And that Azura Path was in the center of that change. Then Merdudin's soul popped out from inside Muyang's body. Unlike before, he was wearing a long golden armor and a helmet. Even though I'm almighty, there is a limit in conquering with these lousy specters. To win against the one with 2 horns, there is no answer by just increasing the numbers. Who is the one with 2 horns? He's the one who reigns Azura Path. He has a similar appearance to you but slightly different. He is stronger than you and darker. For some reason he is currently sealed, but he's been reacting as I've continued to conquer. Muyang knitted his brows. The one that reigned over Azura Path had the same appearance as him. The fact that he had 2 horns was different, but he was sealed. Then you can't conquer any further? However, he was about to hit 50%. Muyang's instincts cried out that if he was to fill the rest of the 2%, a real change will occur. Merdudin pondered for a moment before he shook his head. I think a bit more is possible. However, you shouldn't be greedy. There is a chance you will lose even the parts I've conquered when that guy awakens. Now we need stronger specters than to increase in numbers. Merdudin was clear on what he wanted to say. That even if he was to increase the number of Dakibi specters, they had reached their limit. Muyang was convinced. The world flipped around. The position of the dead and the living had changed. The living didn't care, but the dead were all looking at Muyang. The ones who were here from the past. Not just Dakibis, but he could even see the pre-existing dead souls. There were also Duaxinus like Siohan and Arlo. Ancestors. The ones who died here without being able to become the So it was like this. The Eye of Azura looked at the world of the dead. It allowed him to stand on the boundary. However, the strong existences above Duaxinus ignored Muyang. It seems like it's because my specter creating ability is low. If he could collect the pre-existing souls, he no longer had a reason to collect the Dakibis. However, to take control of all these existences, he needed a stronger specter creating ability. If he could control strong spirits, he could add them to Azura Path and use them for many things as well. For instance, Muyang held a Minotaur's soul in one hand. Like this. Only one is possible right now. He couldn't overlap multiple spirits. However, there was definite room for improvement. Muyang smiled in satisfaction. As expected, this place was a gold mine for Muyang. Sith. Thump. Thump. The Dakibis could only be petrified by the appearance of the green giants. Coming this far, about half of the Dakibis had died. But the mood wasn't bad. However, the tension doubled when the ogres appeared. Ogres were high-rank monsters. They were a bit below the fire tars, but when simply looking at their destructiveness, they were above the fire tars. They were the worst enemies for the Dakibis. It was the same for Duaxinus. Siohan was completely exhausted and Arlo was at his limit fighting just 1 or 2 ogres. Even if they were to push with their numbers, they couldn't hold back all 30 ogres. Qua. Ayak. Thump. Crush. Few tens of Dokkaebi's lives died every time the ogres moved. They showed that much overwhelming power. All the Dakibis clenched their teeth. It was the same for Siohan. Siohan's entire body was covered in blood. He was barely able to hold back an ogre, but he didn't know how long he would last. If it's like this. Siohan made a hopeless expression as he pushed his disjointed shoulder back into the socket. If he died now, contributions and everything became meaningless. Just like that, the ruler of the fire Dakibis, Arlo, would win. Move. It was when Siohan was getting ready to fight back. Before he realized, Muyang stood beside him. However, Siohan couldn't treat Muyang as he did in the past. What the? Siohan's eyes widened. Behind Muyang, few thousands of black specters showed their faces. It was like a dark storm. As he stepped forward, the specters scattered and ate up an ogre. He was able to physically and spiritually restrain them with specters. Qua. The ogre screamed loudly. Swish. Muyang took out Anguish and shot straight towards it. However, the ogre was able to remove the restraints shortly after. Push. As if he knew it would happen, Muyang kicked the floor. Instantly, he climbed up the ogre's arm and immediately slashed at its shoulder. However, the wound wasn't deep. The specters moved again. Few thousand specters held the ogre's ankles. However, ogres were monsters with very high resistance. In an instant, it broke free from the specters. It's not like there was no way to hold back an ogre, but it was amazing for the low-rank specters to hold back an ogre even for a moment. Even more, the ogres were high-rank monsters. Muyang couldn't do it alone, but if he summoned all his undead, he might be able to handle one. But besides the original undead, there were about 1,000 Dakibis in waiting, but he couldn't just carelessly summon them. The undead are my last resort. The undead were going to play an important role in catching Headley's cow. Muyang was successful in reducing the candidates for Headley's cow to 2. There were 5 recently joined Dakibi kings who received the trust of Arlo the Duaxini and initiated some changes. While he was observing them, he awakened the Eye of Azura. Muyang was now able to contact the world of the dead. However, the dead weren't easily able to approach 2 of the 5 suspects. Muyang already knew that strong fairies could restrict the movements of spiritual beings. That meant that one of the 2 Dakibis was most likely Headley's cow. 2 is enough. If there were only 2 candidates, he could keep an eye on them and would even have the time to capture them in the case of an emergency. And now Muyang was working to reduce the candidates down to 1. What Headley's cow wanted was to be victorious in the endless battlefield. He didn't know why, but for some reason it was helping the fire Dakibis and providing them with support. However, if it was faced with danger, it would have no choice but to show its true form. To do this, it was best to first make the fire Dakibis experience danger, and to balance the power it was best for him to help Siohan. Ogres were thorough hunters. They would attack the weakest first. And he clearly saw through their intentions as they targeted the lesser-numbered ice Dakibis first. However, the situation would reverse once Muyang added his strength. Using shadow teleportation, Muyang instantly moved to Siohan's side again. Are you just going to stand there and watch? Kwawa. Muyang spoke as he watched the enraged ogre roar. They were truly high-rank monsters. It was hard for him alone. However, if Siohan, the ruler of the ice Dakibis, helped him, he would be able to reduce the number of ogres more easily. It's not a power of an ice Dakibi. It's not like there aren't any Dakibis without exceptional power. Aren't those fire Dakibis using a strange power as well? There was no law that stated ice Dakibis could only use ice-type skills. Although it could make him a bit suspicious, using one would be fine. It would be a problem if he summoned the undead here as well, but using the specter's strength to momentarily restrain one's movements wouldn't be all that strange. What was more, the stamina of fire dakibis were interconnected to prevent Arlo from becoming exhausted. However, Siohan, who looked at Muyang, gulped. It's the power of the spirits of the dead. Although they are vulgar, the strength itself. There were lots of dakibis who could control spirits of the dead. However, there were only a handful of dakibis who could freely control numerous spirits of the dead. And Siohan knew that at the end of that path was Azura. The and the dakibis worshipped both meant Azura. There were only a handful of dakibis who knew the past name Azura. Siohan was one of them. They said that you could obtain the position of once you cleared the trial of but it was all part of a ceremony. You couldn't become the real And although it was only for a second, Muyang's appearance seemed to be that of the real It was like seeing Azura's loyal vassal. No, that's not possible. It was an exaggeration. Siohan quickly shook his head. He must have been delusional since his mind was completely exhausted. Muyang was simply controlling the specters. First, let's work together to stop the ogres. Siohan made a decision. Muyang was much stronger than other dakibis. Siohan felt he could win against 1 or 2 ogres if they worked together. Of course, Muyang was weaker than himself, but the fact that he was an ice dakibi was important. With a careless look, Muyang started to talk. I will hold back the ogre. You slit its throat. Though, even if he was an ice dakibi, he didn't seem to have an ounce of respect towards him. Siohan inwardly clicked his tongue. It wasn't time to quibble over such things now. Thump, thump, thump. Enraged ogres were approaching. Swawish. A gap appeared in the air and a small fairy popped out. The fairy looked around before smiling brightly once she found someone high up in the sky and quickly moved towards her. Uni, one. Oh my Wuhi, you came? The fairy who suddenly appeared was Wuhi. Wuhi. I came to ask for a bit help in creating a trial. You didn't finish it yet? Well, it's hard to find the right balance. Wuhi, who was having a private conversation, looked down for a moment and was surprised. They are dakibis? It was a trial requested by Azura in the first place. The time had come. There he is. Wuhi. Wuhi flew around chaotically and smiled slightly as she found a dakibi. Is it because you found a dakibi you know? Uni, I think I found my mate. You're not saying that a dakibi is your mate, right? The fairy who Wuhi called Uni wiggled her brow. Out of all beings, for a dakibi to be a fairy's mate. It was something that just couldn't happen, but Wuhi didn't seem to care and replied. It's true. Wuhi, there are a lot of fairies who are interested in you. They're all just boring. They need to drink some more goat milk. And Mom told me to meet a strong guy who draws my attention. Mom? The fairy queen. Wuhi was probably the only one who could call the fairy queen her mom. Originally, fairies didn't have parents. They were born from nature and were beings who lived for thousands of years. However, the fairy queen gave Wuhi that kind of advice. When she thought of the fairy queen's personality, it was something that could happen, but even still, it was amazing. But Wuhi didn't care and just smiled. Wuhi. He must have come to take Wuhi, I'm certain of it. Just watch him. Since that guy is really strong. Wuhi concentrated and watched the dakibi. However, the Uni fairy couldn't accept it. Wasn't it the dakibi who just wandered around corpses all this time? She never saw him fight. Wuhi must be mistaken. She thought that even if that dakibi fought, he wouldn't be all that strong. However, after the ogres appeared and she saw the black specters, she couldn't help but change her thoughts. Husband. Win. It wasn't odd to see Wuhi leap up to cheer for him. The fight was that intense. There was something about him that made the palms of those who watched sweat. Boom. The ogre's body exploded. Even something like this was possible. Muyang nodded his head as he discovered something new about the specters. There would be an explosion when he gathered the specters together and made them crash into each other. He was able to physically damage them from afar. Gah! Siohan kneeled onto one knee after hunting about half the ogres. His body became worn out after fighting on the front lines. It was admirable for him to last this long. Myung kicked Seohan in the back. Get up. You bastard. If you stop, the rest of the ice dakibis will die. The over 30,000 dakibis were reduced to half before they knew it. The strength of the military would crumble when the general fell. Myung hoped Seohan wouldn't die easily. It was because he concluded it was best for him to live and keep the balance between the fire dakibis and the ice dakibis than to die and be turned into an undead. Gah! At Myung's threat, Seohan was barely able to stand back up. For the ice dakibis, Seohan wasn't simply their leader but also their pillar of support. If Seohan fell, the ice dakibis would instantly be annihilated. That was why Myung urged and pushed Seohan further. Thanks to this, they were able to safely finish hunting the ogres. Myung could only frown at the wave that appeared a while later. Dragon skeleton soldiers. They were literally soldiers made from dragon bones. To be exact, they were a type of undead, but even among the undead they were especially tricky to create. The dragon skeleton soldiers were so unbelievably strong that there were even stories about how they were created to guard the rare highly intelligent dragon's dens. It was more so because they were able to nullify most physical and magical attacks. Freak. There were only 10 of them, but it was enough to overwhelm the more than 10,000 dakibis. There was a good chance that the side whom the dragon skeleton soldiers decide to attack first would be destroyed. Everyone instinctively knew this, but the very first to move was none other than Myung. We're at the crossroad. Here the winner will be decided. The moment he thought that, his body instinctively moved. Fwa. Specters flew around Myung. Myung grabbed one of them. 10 minutes was enough. Myung didn't believe he could deal with 10 dragon skeleton soldiers by himself like an idiot. It was beyond reckless, it was foolish. But he didn't take the lead without a plan. Myung was planning on blocking the dragon skeleton soldiers and slightly adjusting their direction. Eek. You a piece of bone. Towards the fire dakibis. Myung's movements were so natural that no one felt his actions were deliberate. With everyone scared out of their wits due to the appearance of dragon skeleton soldiers, Arlo, the leader of the fire dakibis, who didn't think that Myung's actions were intentional, started to move. However, even Arlo couldn't fight against the dragon skeleton soldiers one-on-one. He was just holding on with his infinite stamina. How long can he last? Myung watched the dragon skeleton soldier massacre the fire dakibis as he focused on the two who were most likely Headley's cow. If one of the two was Headley's cow, it wouldn't just quietly watch the current situation. If the situation continued, it was obvious that it would end with the destruction of the fire dakibis. That didn't mean that other dakibis were in good situations themselves, but he meant that the ones who were most affected were the fire dakibis. It would be hard for the Headley's cow to just sit back and watch. Headley's cow's goal was to defeat the Trial of Hum. Myung was at least certain of that. He was certain that it hit among the fire dakibis as they were most likely to win. It would show some sort of reaction. And Myung's prediction wasn't off. Swang. Of the two, one's movements changed. It stopped moving and the density of its muscles started to change. Eventually, it changed its shape and changed into something like a duoxony. Other dakibis might see this and think he could have evolved while fighting, but Myung was certain. It wasn't like an evolution. It was very different from something as refined as that. I found it. Myung's puckered his lips. It turned into a duoxony to overcome danger, but that became the deciding factor. That one. The fairy who could freely change its shape. Headley's cow. He finally found it. 1. Uni. When a younger female refers to an older/big sister or a female older than them.